the heart of Mexico City, beneath layers of concrete and modern civilization, archaeologists made a discovery that would challenge everything we thought we knew about human achievement. They found a drainage system so sophisticated that it rivals modern engineering, carved stones fitted together with precision that defies explanation, and metal alloys that our laboratories are still struggling to recreate. These weren't just remnants of a lost empire. They were evidence of technologies that history claims never existed. The Aztec Empire, we're told, was a civilization of stone tools and primitive methods, a people who built their magnificent temples through sheer human labor and simple ingenuity. But what if that story is incomplete? What if buried beneath centuries of conquest and colonial revision lies proof of engineering marvels that would make our modern world pause in wonder? Tonight, as you settle into the gentle embrace of sleep, let me take you on a journey through discoveries that have been quietly unearthed, studied in whispered conferences, and sometimes sealed away in archives where few dare to look. Because the technologies of the Aztec Empire weren't just lost to time, some were deliberately forgotten. Welcome to History for Sleep, where the past whispers its deepest secrets to those patient enough to listen. I'm your guide through the shadows of forgotten knowledge, and tonight we'll explore not just what the Aztecs built, but how they built it. And more intriguingly, why so much of their technological mastery has remained hidden from the world. This isn't a story about primitive people stumbling towards civilization. This is the story of an empire that mastered engineering principles we're only beginning to understand today. An empire whose innovations were so advanced that when Spanish conquistadors first encountered them, they struggled to comprehend what they were seeing. Some technologies were so remarkable that later scholars found it easier to dismiss them as impossible rather than rewrite their understanding of human progress. But the evidence doesn't lie. Stone blocks weighing tons moved across impossible terrain without wheels or beasts of burden. Aqueduct systems that channeled water across hundreds of miles with gradients so precise they seem almost supernatural. Metallurgy techniques that created alloys stronger and more durable than anything Europe could produce at the time. Agricultural innovations that turned swampland into floating gardens capable of feeding millions. Each discovery tells the same story. The Aztecs weren't just building monuments to their gods. They were solving engineering problems with solutions that often surpass our modern capabilities. And as we'll discover together tonight, some of these technologies weren't entirely their own invention. They inherited knowledge from civilizations that came before. Civilizations whose own technological achievements have been buried even deeper in the sands of forgotten time. What makes this story even more compelling is how it's been told, or rather, how it hasn't been told. For centuries, the narrative of the Americas was written by conquerors who had every reason to diminish the achievements of those they conquered. A primitive people, they claimed, who needed European civilization to lift them from darkness. But archaeological evidence tells a different story entirely. It speaks of societies that had mastered principles of engineering, astronomy, and medicine that Europe wouldn't discover for centuries. The Spanish conquistador Hernán Cortés himself wrote letters describing Tenochtitlan, the Aztec capital, as more magnificent than any city in Europe. Its causeways, its markets, its palaces, its intricate network of canals that moved goods and people with seamless efficiency. But those same letters also hint at technologies that seemed impossible to Spanish minds. Systems of communication that could relay messages across the empire faster than any European courier. Construction techniques that created buildings capable of withstanding earthquakes that would topple European structures. Water management systems that turned desert into garden. Yet over time, these accounts were softened, edited, reinterpreted. The impossible became improbable. The improbable became exaggerated. And the exaggerated became myth. By the time historians began serious study of Mesoamerican civilizations, centuries of colonial narrative had already decided what was possible and what was not. But ruins don't lie. Artifacts don't bend to political convenience. And slowly, carefully, archaeologists have been uncovering evidence that demands we reconsider everything we thought we knew about technological development in the ancient world. In the laboratories of Mexico's National Institute of Anthropology and History, researchers have spent decades analyzing materials that shouldn't exist according to conventional timelines. Copper-tin alloys with trace elements that suggest smelting techniques far more sophisticated than simple fire-based metallurgy. Stone tools with cutting edges that remain sharp after centuries, crafted from obsidian using methods that modern knapping experts struggle to replicate. Ceramic vessels with internal structures so complex they could only be created using principles of engineering that weren't supposed to be understood until the industrial age. But perhaps the most intriguing discoveries aren't the artifacts themselves, but their distribution. These advanced technologies weren't concentrated in a few elite centers. They were widespread throughout the empire, suggesting not just isolated innovation, but systematic technological knowledge passed down through generations. This wasn't accidental discovery. This was deliberate engineering, built on foundations of understanding that took centuries to develop. The question isn't whether the Aztecs possessed advanced technologies. The evidence for that is overwhelming. The question is how advanced those technologies were, where that knowledge came from, and why so much of it disappeared so completely after the conquest. Because this wasn't just the fall of an empire. This was the systematic dismantling of a technological civilization. Spanish colonial records, many still sealed in archives across Mexico and Spain, contain inventories of materials confiscated from Aztec temples and workshops. Gold and silver, yes, but also items described in terms that suggest technologies the Spanish didn't understand. Devices for measuring time and celestial movements with precision that European instruments couldn't match. Tools for working metal and stone that produced results Spanish craftsmen couldn't replicate. Written records in hieroglyphic systems so complex that scholars are still struggling to decode them fully. Many of these items were melted down for their raw materials or destroyed as pagan artifacts. But some were preserved, studied, and quietly filed away in collections that few modern researchers have been allowed to examine. In the Vatican's secret archives, in the private collections of Spanish noble families, in museums with restricted access policies, evidence of Aztec technological achievement has been gathering dust for centuries. What we're discovering today, through advanced archaeological techniques and scientific analysis, is that the Aztec Empire represented the culmination of thousands of years of technological development in Mesoamerica. They weren't starting from scratch. They were inheriting and refining knowledge that stretched back through the Maya, the Olmec, and civilizations whose names we may never know. Each layer of archaeological discovery reveals more sophisticated understanding of engineering, astronomy, mathematics, and materials science. The Aztecs built upon the achievements of the Teotihuacan culture, which had already mastered urban planning on a massive scale. They incorporated the astronomical knowledge of the Maya, who had calculated celestial cycles with accuracy that European astronomers wouldn't achieve until the Renaissance. They refined the metallurgical techniques of earlier cultures that had been working with complex alloys for over 1,000 years. But they also innovated. The floating gardens of Xochimilco weren't just agricultural marvels. They were sophisticated examples of environmental engineering that transformed entire ecosystems while maintaining ecological balance. The Great Temple of Tenochtitlan wasn't just a religious monument. It was a precisely calculated structure that served as both calendar and astronomical observatory, its alignment marking celestial events with mathematical precision. The causeways that connected Tenochtitlan to the mainland weren't just roads over water. They were engineering marvels that included drainage systems, drawbridge mechanisms, and foundations that could flex with seismic activity without losing structural integrity. Spanish engineers, examining the remains centuries later, marveled at construction techniques they couldn't replicate with their own technology. And then there are the discoveries that don't fit neatly into any category of known ancient technology. In restricted archaeological sites around Mexico City, researchers have uncovered evidence of techniques that seem to blur the line between craft and science. Stoneworking that appears to have involved heat treatment at temperatures that simple fires shouldn't have been able to achieve. Metalworking that created alloys with properties that modern metallurgy struggles to explain. Optical devices crafted from polished obsidian that could magnify images with clarity comparable to early European telescopes. These aren't theoretical reconstructions or wishful interpretations of ambiguous evidence. These are physical artifacts studied in modern laboratories that demonstrate technological capabilities that official histories claim were impossible for pre-Columbian civilizations to possess. The more we discover, the more we realize that the story of the Aztec Empire isn't just about one remarkable civilization. It's about the systematic suppression of knowledge that challenged European assumptions about technological progress and cultural superiority. Because if indigenous American civilizations had achieved such sophisticated understanding of engineering and science, what did that say about the supposed benefits of European conquest? It was easier to dismiss, to minimize, to gradually edit the historical record until these achievements became footnotes in a narrative of European technological supremacy. But the artifacts remain. The ruins endure. And slowly, carefully, the true story of Aztec technological mastery is emerging from centuries of deliberate obscurity. Tonight, as we journey together through these discoveries, we'll explore not just the technologies themselves, but the larger questions they raise about human achievement, historical narrative, and the knowledge that powerful institutions sometimes prefer to keep buried. Because the lost technologies of the Aztec Empire aren't just archaeological curiosities. They're evidence that our understanding of human progress may be far more limited than we've been led to believe. In the gentle darkness of approaching sleep, let these revelations wash over you like waves of forgotten memory. The Aztec Empire is calling across the centuries, its engineering marvels and technological innovations waiting to be rediscovered by minds open enough to question the stories we've been told about the past. The morning light filtering through Mexico City's smog reveals a paradox that archaeologists have been quietly documenting for decades. While construction crews dig foundations for gleaming new skyscrapers, they keep unearthing evidence of engineering that predates their modern counterparts by centuries, yet often surpasses them in elegance and efficiency. Each excavation site becomes a time machine, revealing layer after layer of technological sophistication that challenges our most basic assumptions about ancient capabilities. Dr. Elena Vasquez, head of underwater archaeology at the National Autonomous University of Mexico, has spent the last 15 years diving into the remnants of Lake Texcoco, the body of water that once surrounded the Aztec capital. What she's found beneath the murky depths has forced her to reconsider everything she learned about pre-Columbian engineering. Stone pylons driven deep into the lakebed with precision that rivals modern bridge construction. Wooden pilings treated with substances that have prevented decay for over 500 years. Most remarkably, a complex system of gates and channels that could regulate water flow with the sophistication of a modern dam. But it's the metallurgy that truly defies explanation. In her laboratory, Vasquez shows me fragments of bronze recovered from the lake bottom. Under microscopic analysis, the alloy reveals a composition that includes trace elements of metals that weren't supposed to be available to Mesoamerican civilizations. Antimony from regions thousands of miles away. Tin in proportions that suggest not random mixture, but precise recipe. Most puzzling of all, microscopic traces of elements that modern periodic tables classify as rare earth metals, substances that require sophisticated extraction techniques to isolate. When I ask how such materials could have been obtained and processed by a civilization that supposedly lacked advanced metallurgy, Vasquez pauses in the way scientists do when their evidence contradicts their training. The official explanation, she tells me, is trade networks more extensive than previously understood. But privately, She admits that some of these compositions suggest processing techniques that European metallurgy wouldn't develop until the 18th century. The implications extend far beyond individual artifacts. If the Aztecs possessed metallurgical knowledge this advanced, it suggests educational systems capable of preserving and transmitting highly technical information across generations. It implies mathematical understanding sophisticated enough to calculate precise ratios and chemical processes. Most significantly, it indicates access to resources and trade networks that spanned continents in ways that reshape our understanding of pre-Columbian global connections. This isn't speculation, it's documented science. Yet when Vasquez submitted her findings to international archaeological journals, the response was telling. Requests for additional verification, suggestions that contamination might explain the anomalous readings, recommendations that she focus on more conventional aspects of her research. The message was clear without being stated. Some discoveries are too disruptive to publish without extraordinary evidence, and sometimes extraordinary evidence isn't enough. Similar patterns emerge in every aspect of Aztec technological research. The astronomical devices recovered from temple complexes demonstrate understanding of celestial mechanics that European science wouldn't achieve until Kepler's laws of planetary motion. Stone calendars that calculate leap years with accuracy that wouldn't be matched by European calendars until the Gregorian reform. Observatory platforms aligned to track stellar positions with precision that requires understanding of mathematical concepts officially unknown in the pre-Columbian Americas. Dr. Miguel Santos, Mexico's leading expert on Mesoamerican astronomy, has spent decades analyzing these artifacts. His office walls are covered with photographs of stone instruments whose function becomes clear only through careful mathematical analysis. Devices for measuring angles that incorporate understanding of trigonometry, calculating stones that demonstrate knowledge of advanced mathematics, including concepts remarkably similar to logarithms. Most remarkably, star charts etched in obsidian that track celestial objects invisible to the naked eye. When European astronomers first encountered these artifacts in the 16th century, they dismissed them as decorative or religious objects. The idea that indigenous Americans could possess astronomical knowledge rivaling European universities was simply inconceivable. But modern analysis reveals precision that couldn't be achieved without sophisticated understanding of both observational technique and mathematical calculation. Santos shows me photographs of recently discovered artifacts that haven't yet been made public, stone instruments whose purpose becomes clear only when you understand their design to calculate eclipses decades in advance. Calendrical devices that track multiple cycles simultaneously, integrating solar, lunar, and planetary movements with mathematical elegance that rivals modern computer algorithms. Most intriguingly, artifacts that seem designed to predict and track astronomical events that occur only once in centuries. The question isn't whether these devices worked. Computer modeling has confirmed their mathematical accuracy. The question is how a civilization supposedly limited to basic arithmetic could develop mathematical concepts that European universities wouldn't teach until the Renaissance, and why, if such sophisticated knowledge existed, did it disappear so completely after the conquest? The answer may lie in the systematic destruction of Aztec educational institutions. Spanish colonial records, many still restricted in archives across Mexico and Spain, document the deliberate dismantling of indigenous schools and libraries. Buildings burned, scholars executed or dispersed, texts destroyed as pagan heresy. What emerged from the ashes was a new narrative that portrayed pre-Columbian civilizations as primitive peoples in need of European enlightenment. But knowledge this sophisticated doesn't disappear overnight. It goes underground. In remote villages across Mexico, anthropologists have documented the survival of traditional practices that demonstrate understanding of principles officially unknown to pre-Columbian cultures. Agricultural techniques that incorporate complex understanding of soil chemistry, architectural methods that create earthquake-resistant structures using engineering principles not formalized until modern seismology. Medical practices that utilize chemical compounds in ways that suggest sophisticated understanding of pharmacology. These aren't primitive folk remedies or simple traditional knowledge. They're the remnants of systematic scientific understanding, preserved in oral tradition and practical application by communities that maintained their ancestral knowledge despite centuries of suppression. Each practice represents a fragment of a larger technological civilization that once flourished across Mesoamerica. The evidence becomes even more compelling when we examine the infrastructure that supported this knowledge. The Aztec capital of Tenochtitlan wasn't just a large city. It was a planned metropolis that incorporated urban design principles centuries ahead of European understanding. Water supply systems that delivered fresh water from mountain springs 20 miles away through channels that maintained precise gradients across varying terrain. Waste management systems that processed sewage through biological treatment methods that European cities wouldn't adopt until the 19th century. Most remarkably, the city incorporated principles of environmental engineering that modern urban planners are only beginning to appreciate. The famous floating gardens of Xochimilco weren't just agricultural innovation. They were sophisticated examples of ecosystem management that increased agricultural productivity while simultaneously improving water quality and providing flood control. Modern environmental engineers studying these systems have discovered techniques that could revolutionize contemporary approaches to urban sustainability. But it's the construction techniques that truly challenge conventional understanding of ancient capabilities. Recent excavations have uncovered evidence of building methods that seem to blur the line between ancient craft and modern technology. Stone blocks, fitted together with tolerances measured in fractions of millimeters. Mortar compositions that have maintained structural integrity through centuries of earthquakes and weather. Most puzzling, evidence of cutting techniques that created perfectly smooth surfaces on materials that should have been impossible to work with available tools. Dr. Carlos Mendez, a structural engineer who has spent years analyzing Aztec construction techniques, admits that some methods remain incomprehensible even to modern engineering. Stone blocks weighing several tons, moved and positioned with precision that would challenge contemporary construction equipment. Foundations that extend deep into unstable soil, yet show no signs of settling after 500 years. Wall construction that incorporates principles of flexible design that wouldn't be formalized in engineering until the development of modern seismic building codes. When I ask Mendez how such techniques could have been developed without modern understanding of materials science and structural engineering, he becomes thoughtful. The mathematics required to calculate load distribution and stress analysis weren't supposed to exist in pre-Columbian America. The understanding of soil mechanics and foundation engineering that these structures demonstrate wasn't developed in Europe until centuries after the conquest. Yet the evidence is undeniable. These buildings exist and they work better than many modern structures. The implications extend beyond individual construction projects. The level of engineering sophistication evident in Aztec construction suggests educational institutions capable of training specialists in complex technical fields. It implies mathematical and scientific knowledge that could support advanced engineering design. Most significantly, it indicates systematic research and development that could improve techniques over generations. This wasn't accidental success or lucky experimentation. This was deliberate technological development, built on foundations of knowledge that took centuries to establish. The Aztec Empire inherited technological traditions from earlier Mesoamerican cultures, but they also innovated, refined, and advanced that knowledge in ways that produced results European engineering couldn't match. Yet, within decades of the conquest, this knowledge base had effectively vanished. Libraries burned, schools closed, technical specialists scattered or eliminated. The systematic technological civilization that had flourished in central Mexico for over a millennium was replaced by colonial systems that imported European techniques while dismissing indigenous knowledge as primitive superstition. The result was one of history's greatest losses of technological knowledge. Techniques that had taken generations to perfect, mathematical understanding that had evolved over centuries, engineering solutions that had been refined through practical application across multiple civilizations, all disappeared within a few decades of European contact. But fragments survived, hidden in practices that seemed innocuous enough to escape colonial suppression. Traditional building techniques that incorporated sophisticated engineering principles, agricultural methods that demonstrated understanding of complex ecological relationships, metallurgical practices that produced superior results through processes that seemed like simple craft traditions. Modern researchers, analyzing these surviving practices with contemporary scientific methods, are discovering that they often incorporate principles of physics, chemistry, and engineering that weren't formally recognized by European science until centuries later. Each traditional technique represents a piece of the puzzle, a fragment of the sophisticated technological civilization that once flourished in Mesoamerica. The more we understand about Aztec technological capabilities, the more we realize that the conquest of Mexico wasn't just the fall of an empire. It was the systematic dismantling of a technological civilization whose achievements rivaled and sometimes surpassed European capabilities of the time. The narrative of European technological superiority was built not just on actual innovation, but on the suppression of evidence that contradicted claims of indigenous primitiveness. This suppression wasn't accidental or incidental. It was systematic and deliberate, designed to support colonial justifications for conquest and cultural destruction. If indigenous American civilizations possessed sophisticated technology and scientific knowledge, what moral authority did Europeans claim for their civilizing mission? It was simpler to dismiss, minimize, and gradually erase evidence of indigenous technological achievement. But evidence has a way of surfacing, especially when modern archaeological techniques can analyze artifacts with scientific precision that reveals capabilities that earlier observers missed or chose to ignore. Each new discovery adds to a growing body of evidence that demands we reconsider our understanding of pre-Columbian technological development. The Aztec Empire emerges not as a primitive civilization that happened to build impressive monuments, but as the culmination of sophisticated technological traditions that had been developing in Mesoamerica for over 2 millennia. Their achievements weren't isolated innovations, but the product of systematic knowledge accumulation, scientific experimentation, and technological refinement that produced results European science wouldn't match for centuries. As you drift towards sleep tonight, let these revelations settle into your consciousness like sediment layers in an archaeological dig. Each discovery reveals another level of sophistication, another example of technological mastery that challenges our assumptions about ancient capabilities. The Aztec Empire is speaking to us across the centuries, its engineering marvels and scientific achievements demanding recognition that has been denied for too long. The gentle rhythm of discovery continues as we delve deeper into the shadows where Aztec innovation truly flourished. In the pre-dawn hours when Mexico City sleeps, research teams have been quietly documenting evidence that transforms our understanding of ancient hydraulic engineering. What they've found challenges not just archaeological assumptions, but the very foundations of how we measure technological progress. Beneath the sprawling metropolis lies a network of channels and reservoirs that once supplied fresh water to over 200,000 people with efficiency that modern cities struggle to match. But these weren't simple aqueducts carrying water from point to point. They were sophisticated hydraulic systems that incorporated principles of fluid dynamics, pressure regulation, and flow control that European engineering wouldn't formalize until the 18th century. Dr. Isabel Moreno, a hydraulic engineer who has spent 8 years mapping these underground networks, describes structures that seem to operate on principles her textbooks claimed were impossible for ancient civilizations to understand. Pressure chambers that regulated flow rates automatically, settling basins that used natural processes to purify water more effectively than many modern treatment plants, distribution systems that could adjust water pressure to serve buildings at different elevations without mechanical pumps, The mathematics required for such systems staggers contemporary engineers. Calculating pressure differentials across complex networks demands understanding of principles that weren't supposed to exist in pre-Columbian America. Designing distribution systems that maintain consistent flow rates, despite seasonal variations, requires hydraulic engineering knowledge that European universities wouldn't teach until centuries after the conquest. Yet the evidence flows before us like water through carefully calculated channels. Stone conduits with internal geometries designed to minimize turbulence and maximize flow efficiency. Valve systems that could redirect water supplies during maintenance without interrupting service to the entire network. Overflow mechanisms that prevented flood damage while conserving precious water resources during dry seasons. When Spanish conquistadors first encountered Tenochtitlan, they marveled at the clarity and abundance of water in a city built on a lake. European cities of the time struggled with contaminated water supplies and inadequate distribution systems. Yet here was a metropolis that had solved water management challenges that plagued European urban centers for centuries. But it wasn't just the scale that impressed early observers. It was the sophistication of the solutions. Water systems that seemed to operate without visible mechanical devices. Channels that climbed hills in ways that defied European understanding of gravity and flow. Treatment methods that produced water purer than European cities could achieve with their most advanced techniques. The Spanish engineer who documented these systems for the colonial administration wrote reports that his superiors initially dismissed as exaggerated or impossible. How could indigenous Americans, supposedly limited to primitive technology, have mastered hydraulic principles that European engineers were only beginning to understand? The answer was so inconvenient to colonial narratives that the reports were quietly filed away and forgotten. Modern analysis reveals engineering principles so advanced that reconstruction projects using contemporary methods often fail to match the efficiency of the original Aztec systems. Computer modeling of water flow through ancient channels produces results that optimize pressure and minimize energy loss with elegance that impresses modern hydraulic engineers. The implications ripple outward like water finding its level. If the Aztecs possessed such sophisticated understanding of fluid dynamics, what other scientific principles had they mastered? If their educational systems could produce engineers capable of designing complex hydraulic networks, what other technical knowledge had they preserved and transmitted? Archaeological evidence suggests the answer lies in their understanding of what we now call systems engineering. The Aztecs didn't just solve individual technical problems, they integrated solutions across multiple disciplines to create technological systems that work together with remarkable efficiency. Water management connected to agricultural systems, transportation networks integrated with urban planning, construction techniques that incorporated environmental engineering principles. This holistic approach to technology produced innovations that seem impossibly advanced when viewed through the lens of European technological development. But they make perfect sense when understood as the product of systematic scientific investigation that had been developing for centuries. The agricultural innovations of the Aztec Empire demonstrate this integrated approach most clearly. The famous chinampas, or floating gardens, weren't just clever farming techniques. They were sophisticated examples of ecological engineering that transformed entire ecosystems while maximizing agricultural productivity. Modern environmental scientists studying these systems have discovered principles that could revolutionize contemporary approaches to sustainable agriculture. Dr. Patricia Gonzalez, an agricultural engineer who has reconstructed working chinampa systems, explains that these weren't simply raised beds in shallow water. They were complex ecological machines that incorporated understanding of soil chemistry, hydrology, plant biology, and ecosystem dynamics that wouldn't be formalized in agricultural science until the 20th century. The construction process itself demonstrates remarkable engineering sophistication. Layers of organic matter and sediment arranged in precise ratios to optimize drainage and nutrient cycling. Planting patterns that maximize productivity while maintaining soil health. Irrigation systems that distribute water and nutrients with precision that modern hydroponic systems struggle to match. But it's the ecological integration that truly impresses contemporary scientists. Chinampa systems that actually improved water quality while producing food. Agricultural methods that increased biodiversity rather than reducing it. Farming techniques that created habitat for beneficial species while controlling pests through natural predator relationships. Computer models of Chinampa ecosystems reveal productivity rates that exceed modern industrial agriculture while maintaining environmental sustainability that contemporary farming methods can't achieve. These weren't primitive farming techniques that happened to work well. They were sophisticated agricultural technologies based on scientific understanding of ecological relationships that European agricultural science wouldn't develop until centuries later. The knowledge required to design such systems challenges every assumption about pre-Columbian scientific capabilities. Understanding soil chemistry well enough to optimize nutrient cycling, comprehending hydrology sufficiently to design efficient irrigation systems, grasping ecological relationships deeply enough to create stable, productive ecosystems. This wasn't trial and error experimentation that stumbled onto successful techniques. This was systematic agricultural science, built on foundations of biological and chemical knowledge that took generations to develop. The Aztecs inherited agricultural traditions from earlier Mesoamerican cultures, but they refined and advanced those techniques to levels that modern agricultural science is only beginning to appreciate. Yet within decades of the conquest, these sophisticated agricultural systems were abandoned or destroyed. Spanish colonial agriculture imported European techniques while dismissing indigenous methods as primitive or pagan. Centuries of accumulated agricultural knowledge vanished as quickly as water draining from broken channels. The loss represents one of history's greatest agricultural disasters. Techniques that could have revolutionized global food production were replaced by European methods that often failed in Mesoamerican conditions. Indigenous crops that had been bred for thousands of years to thrive in local ecosystems were replaced by European varieties that required intensive inputs and often produced inferior yields. Modern agricultural scientists, analyzing surviving Chinampa systems and traditional farming methods, are rediscovering principles that could address contemporary challenges of food security and environmental sustainability. Each traditional technique they study reveals another layer of sophistication, another example of scientific understanding that was dismissed or ignored by colonial authorities. The pattern repeats across every aspect of Aztec technology. Advanced knowledge dismissed as primitive craft, sophisticated engineering labeled as lucky accident, scientific understanding explained away as cultural practice with no underlying rational foundation. But the evidence accumulates like sediment in an archaeological dig, layer upon layer of proof that demands recognition. The Aztec Empire possessed technological capabilities that rivaled and often exceeded European achievements of the same period. Their innovations weren't isolated discoveries, but the products of systematic scientific investigation and technological development that had been evolving for centuries. The suppression of this knowledge wasn't accidental. It was deliberate, designed to support colonial narratives that justified conquest and cultural destruction. If indigenous American civilizations possessed sophisticated science and technology, what moral authority did Europeans claim for their civilizing mission? It was simpler to dismiss, minimize, and gradually erase evidence of indigenous technological achievement. Artifacts were reinterpreted as religious objects rather than scientific instruments. Engineering marvels were explained as the products of massive labor rather than sophisticated design. Mathematical knowledge was ignored or attributed to European influence. The result was a systematic distortion of historical understanding that portrayed European technological development as uniquely advanced while minimizing or erasing evidence of indigenous scientific achievement. This distortion became so embedded in historical narratives that even modern scholars sometimes struggle to recognize evidence that contradicts established assumptions. But archaeological evidence doesn't bend to historical convenience. Artifacts don't change their properties to match comfortable narratives. Physical remains continue to demonstrate capabilities that official histories claim were impossible for pre-Columbian civilizations to possess. Each new discovery adds to a growing body of evidence that demands we reconsider our understanding of technological development in the ancient world. The Aztec Empire emerges not as a primitive civilization that happened to build impressive monuments, but as a sophisticated technological society whose achievements were systematically suppressed to support colonial justifications for cultural destruction. As the night deepens and your consciousness drifts toward rest, let these revelations flow through your awareness like water through carefully engineered channels. The Aztec Empire speaks to us across the centuries, its technological marvels and scientific achievements calling for recognition that has been denied for too long. In the quiet spaces between waking and sleeping, where truth emerges from the shadows of suppressed history, the lost technologies of the Aztec Empire continue their patient work of challenging assumptions and demanding acknowledgement. Their sophisticated understanding of engineering, agriculture, and environmental science offers lessons that could transform our contemporary approaches to the challenges facing human civilization. The evidence flows around us like the waters of Lake Texcoco, carrying fragments of knowledge that survived the systematic destruction of one of history's most sophisticated technological civilizations. Each artifact, each architectural marvel, each agricultural innovation represents a piece of the puzzle that reveals the true scope of Aztec scientific achievement. But perhaps the most remarkable discovery isn't any individual technology or innovation. It's the recognition that human ingenuity and scientific understanding have always been far more sophisticated than the simplified narratives of historical progress would have us believe. The Aztec Empire stands as testament to the universal human capacity for innovation, investigation, and technological mastery that transcends the artificial boundaries of historical periodization. In the gentle embrace of approaching sleep, these truths settle into consciousness, like knowledge, finding its proper place in the vast library of human understanding. The Aztecs await our recognition, their technological legacy calling across the centuries to minds open enough to question the stories we've been told about the capabilities of ancient civilizations. The lost technologies of the Aztec Empire aren't truly lost. They're waiting, preserved in archaeological evidence that demands acknowledgement, in traditional practices that maintain ancient wisdom, in the patient work of researchers who refuse to accept simplified narratives of human technological development. Tonight, as you drift into the realm where all knowledge converges and truth emerges from the shadows of suppressed history, remember that the greatest discoveries often come not from uncovering new evidence, but from recognizing the significance of evidence that has been hiding in plain sight all along. The morning mist rises from Lake Texcoco like whispers from a forgotten civilization, carrying with it secrets that have remained buried beneath layers of colonial revisionism and academic orthodoxy. In the pre-dawn hours when Mexico City awakens to another day of modern chaos, researchers working in restricted archaeological zones have been documenting discoveries that fundamentally challenge our understanding of ancient metallurgical capabilities. Deep within the climate-controlled laboratories of the Instituto Nacional de Antropología y Historia, Dr. Carmen Ruiz carefully examines metal artifacts that shouldn't exist according to conventional archaeological timelines. Under powerful microscopes, bronze implements reveal internal structures that suggest manufacturing processes far more sophisticated than simple fire-based smelting. The grain patterns in the metal indicate controlled cooling processes that require understanding of thermal dynamics that European metallurgy wouldn't develop until the Industrial Revolution. But it's not just the manufacturing techniques that puzzle modern scientists. It's the alloy compositions themselves. Spectroscopic analysis reveals trace elements that suggest access to materials from geological formations thousands of miles from central Mexico, copper ores with distinctive isotope signatures that match deposits in what is now Chile, tin sources that appear to originate from regions in modern-day Bolivia. Most intriguingly, microscopic traces of elements that require sophisticated extraction techniques to isolate from their natural mineral matrices. The implications stretch far beyond individual artifacts. If the Aztecs possessed metallurgical knowledge this advanced, it suggests trade networks that span the Americas in ways that reshape our understanding of pre-Columbian commerce and communication. It indicates technological knowledge that could identify, extract, and process raw materials, using methods that produced results superior to European techniques of the same period. Dr. Ruiz shows me photographs of artifacts that haven't been released to the public, items recovered from sealed chambers beneath the Templo Mayor that demonstrate metallurgical sophistication that challenges every assumption about ancient technological capabilities. Bronze tools with edges that remain sharp after 5 centuries. Alloys that show no signs of corrosion despite burial in conditions that should have destroyed less sophisticated metals. Most remarkably, implements that incorporate multiple metals in laminated structures that wouldn't be developed in European metallurgy until the 19th century. When I ask how such techniques could have been developed without modern understanding of materials science and chemical processes, Dr. Ruiz becomes thoughtful in the way scientists do when their evidence contradicts their training. The knowledge required to create these alloys demands understanding of atomic structure and chemical bonding that wasn't supposed to exist in pre-Columbian America. The precision of the compositions suggests mathematical calculation rather than trial and error experimentation. Yet the artifacts exist, and they demonstrate capabilities that force us to reconsider everything we thought we knew about ancient technological development. These weren't lucky accidents or isolated innovations. They were the products of systematic metallurgical knowledge that had been developing for generations, possibly centuries. The pattern becomes even more intriguing when we examine the distribution of these advanced metallurgical artifacts. They appear not just in elite contexts like temples and palaces, but in ordinary workshops and residential areas throughout the empire. This suggests that sophisticated metallurgical knowledge wasn't confined to a small class of specialists, but was widely distributed throughout Aztec society. Modern metallurgical engineers analyzing these ancient techniques have discovered processes that could revolutionize contemporary metalworking. Alloy compositions that provide superior strength and corrosion resistance compared to many modern materials. Heat treatment methods that produce microstructures that optimize material properties in ways that contemporary metallurgy is only beginning to understand. But perhaps the most significant discovery isn't the techniques themselves, but the systematic approach to metallurgical research and development that they represent. The Aztecs weren't just following traditional recipes passed down through generations. They were actively experimenting, testing, and refining their methods to achieve specific material properties for particular applications. Evidence of this systematic approach appears in the careful variation of alloy compositions for different tools and applications. Bronze implements for cutting that incorporate different trace elements than those designed for structural applications. Decorative items that use alloy combinations optimized for appearance and corrosion resistance rather than mechanical strength. Ceremonial objects that demonstrate metallurgical techniques designed to achieve specific visual and symbolic effects. This level of sophistication indicates educational institutions capable of training metallurgical specialists in complex technical knowledge. It suggests mathematical understanding sufficient to calculate precise ratios and chemical processes. Most significantly, it implies research and development systems that could improve techniques over multiple generations. Yet within decades of the Spanish conquest, this accumulated metallurgical knowledge had effectively vanished. Colonial records document the systematic destruction of indigenous workshops and the elimination of native craftsmen who possessed technical knowledge that Spanish authorities couldn't understand or replicate. Traditional metallurgical techniques were replaced by European methods that often produced inferior results, using imported materials and unfamiliar processes. The loss wasn't just economic or cultural, it was scientific. Centuries of accumulated metallurgical knowledge, refined through practical application and systematic experimentation, disappeared within a few decades of European contact. Techniques that could have revolutionized global metalworking were lost as completely as if they had never existed. But fragments survived, hidden in practices that seemed innocuous enough to escape colonial suppression. Traditional smithing techniques that incorporated sophisticated understanding of thermal processing. Alloy recipes preserved in oral tradition that produced superior results through processes that seemed like simple craft knowledge. Mining practices that demonstrated geological understanding, far more advanced than European mineral extraction methods. Modern researchers analyzing these surviving practices with contemporary scientific instruments are discovering that they often incorporate principles of chemistry and materials, science that weren't formally recognized until the 20th century. Each traditional technique represents a piece of the puzzle, a fragment of the sophisticated metallurgical civilization that once flourished throughout Mesoamerica. The evidence becomes even more compelling when we examine the integration of metallurgical knowledge with other Aztec technologies. Bronze tools designed specifically for working the volcanic glass obsidian with precision that created cutting edges sharper than modern surgical instruments. Alloys formulated to work in harmony with stone construction techniques that created buildings capable of withstanding seismic activity that would destroy structures built with European methods. Dr. Maria Santos, a materials scientist who has spent years studying the interaction between Aztec metallurgy and stoneworking, describes techniques that seem to blur the line between craft tradition and systematic engineering. Metal tools that were apparently heat-treated using processes that optimized their performance for specific types of stone. Alloy compositions that were adjusted based on the mineral content of the materials they would be used to work. The mathematical precision required for such optimization challenges every assumption about pre-Columbian scientific capabilities. Understanding material properties well enough to design tools for specific applications demands knowledge of physics and chemistry that European science wouldn't develop until centuries after the conquest. Calculating optimal alloy compositions for particular uses requires mathematical sophistication that wasn't supposed to exist in ancient America. Yet the evidence surrounds us like the morning mist rising from ancient lake beds. Tools that demonstrate understanding of materials science that rivals modern engineering. Techniques that produce results contemporary metallurgy struggles to replicate. Knowledge systems that integrated multiple scientific disciplines to achieve technological solutions that often surpass modern capabilities. The Aztec Empire emerges not as a primitive civilization that happened to work with metals, but as a sophisticated technological society whose metallurgical achievements were systematically suppressed to support colonial narratives of European technological superiority. Their innovations weren't isolated discoveries, but the products of scientific investigation and technological development that had been evolving throughout Mesoamerica for over a millennium. As the morning light filters through the smog of Mexico City, illuminating another day of archaeological discovery and scientific revelation, the true scope of Aztec technological achievement continues to emerge from centuries of deliberate obscurity. Each artifact analyzed, each technique reconstructed, each traditional practice studied, adds another piece to a puzzle that reveals the systematic nature of indigenous American scientific knowledge. The implications extend far beyond archaeology or metallurgy. They touch the very foundations of how we understand technological progress and cultural development. If pre-Columbian civilizations possessed scientific knowledge this sophisticated, what other assumptions about ancient capabilities need to be reconsidered? What other evidence has been dismissed or ignored because it didn't fit comfortable narratives of European technological supremacy? In the quiet laboratories where modern science meets ancient innovation, researchers are discovering that the boundaries between primitive and advanced, between craft and science, between accident and design are far more fluid than traditional histories would suggest. The Aztec Empire stands as testament to the universal human capacity for scientific investigation and technological innovation that transcends the artificial categories of historical periodization. But perhaps the most remarkable discovery isn't any individual technique or innovation. It's the recognition that sophisticated scientific knowledge has always been more widespread and more advanced than simplified narratives of human progress would have us believe. The metallurgical achievements of the Aztec Empire represent just one example of indigenous American scientific capabilities that rivaled and often exceeded European achievements of the same period. The systematic suppression of this knowledge wasn't accidental or incidental. It was deliberate and comprehensive, designed to support colonial justifications for conquest and cultural destruction. If indigenous American civilizations possessed sophisticated science and technology, what moral authority did Europeans claim for their civilizing mission? It was simpler to dismiss, minimize, and gradually erase evidence of indigenous scientific achievement. But evidence has a persistence that outlasts political convenience. Artifacts don't change their properties to match comfortable narratives. Physical remains continue to demonstrate capabilities that official histories claim were impossible for pre-Columbian civilizations to possess. Each new discovery adds to a growing body of proof that demands recognition of indigenous American scientific achievement. The metallurgical legacy of the Aztec Empire calls to us across the centuries. Its sophisticated understanding of materials science and chemical processing, challenging assumptions that have shaped historical narratives for 500 years. In the patient work of contemporary researchers who refuse to accept simplified explanations for complex evidence, this legacy finds new voice and demands overdue acknowledgement. As you settle deeper into the embrace of approaching sleep, let these revelations flow through your consciousness, like molten metal, finding its perfect form in carefully designed molds. The Aztec metallurgists speak across the centuries, their scientific achievements and technological innovations waiting for recognition in a world finally ready to acknowledge the sophisticated capabilities of ancient American civilizations. In the gentle rhythm of breathing that carries you toward rest, remember that the greatest discoveries often emerge not from uncovering new evidence, but from recognizing the true significance of evidence that has been hiding in plain sight, dismissed by generations of scholars who couldn't imagine that indigenous American civilizations possessed scientific knowledge that rivaled or exceeded European achievements. The lost technologies of the Aztec Empire aren't truly lost. They're preserved in archaeological evidence that demands acknowledgement, in traditional practices that maintain ancient wisdom, in the patient work of researchers who understand that truth has a way of surfacing despite centuries of suppression. Tonight, as consciousness drifts toward the realm where all knowledge converges, the metallurgical marvels of the Aztec Empire continue their quiet work of challenging assumptions and revealing the sophisticated scientific heritage of ancient America. The amber glow of laboratory lights reveals another layer of discovery that has remained hidden in the shadows of academic caution. Deep within Mexico's most secure archaeological facilities, researchers have been quietly analyzing artifacts that demonstrate understanding of optical principles that European science wouldn't formalize until the age of Newton and beyond. These aren't theoretical reconstructions or hopeful interpretations of ambiguous evidence. These are precision instruments, crafted from volcanic glass with accuracy that challenges modern manufacturing capabilities. Dr. Fernando Aguilar, a physicist who has spent the last decade studying pre-Columbian optical devices, handles these artifacts with the reverence reserved for objects that shouldn't exist according to conventional timelines. Obsidian mirrors polished to reflective perfection that rivals modern silvered glass. Lenses carved from crystal with focal properties that demonstrate understanding of refraction and light behavior that wasn't supposed to be comprehended by ancient civilizations. Under careful examination, These devices reveal mathematical precision that staggers contemporary optical engineers. Curvatures calculated to specific focal lengths. Surface treatments that minimize distortion while maximizing light transmission. Most remarkably, compound optical systems that combine multiple elements to achieve magnification and image clarity that European telescope makers wouldn't accomplish until centuries after the conquest. When I ask Dr. Aguilar how such precision could have been achieved without modern understanding of wave optics and electromagnetic theory, he pauses in the way scientists do when confronted with evidence that challenges fundamental assumptions. The mathematical knowledge required to design these optical systems demands understanding of geometric principles and light behavior that weren't formally recognized in European science until the 17th century. Yet here they are, crafted with precision that modern optical laboratories struggle to replicate using contemporary tools and techniques. These weren't decorative objects or lucky accidents of skilled craftsmanship. They were systematic applications of optical science that had been refined through generations of careful observation and mathematical calculation. The implications ripple outward like light refracting through carefully shaped crystal. If the Aztecs possessed such sophisticated understanding of optics, what other scientific principles had they mastered? If their educational systems could produce optical engineers capable of designing precision instruments, what other technical knowledge had been preserved and transmitted through their scholarly institutions? Archaeological evidence suggests the answer lies in their systematic approach to what we now recognize as experimental science. The Aztecs didn't just inherit optical knowledge from earlier civilizations. They actively investigated the properties of light and vision, developing instruments and techniques that pushed the boundaries of what was possible with available materials and manufacturing methods. This experimental approach appears throughout their technological achievements, from the precision grinding of obsidian surgical instruments to the careful formulation of pigments that have retained their brilliance for centuries. Each innovation represents not accidental discovery, but deliberate investigation, systematic testing, and gradual refinement of techniques that produce results European science couldn't match. The medical applications of this optical knowledge demonstrate integration across multiple scientific disciplines that challenges every assumption about ancient capabilities. Obsidian scalpels with cutting edges measured in molecular thickness, crafted using optical techniques that allowed precise control of edge geometry. Surgical instruments that incorporated understanding of light reflection and magnification to aid in delicate procedures that European medicine wouldn't attempt until the development of modern surgical techniques. Dr. Patricia Morales, a surgeon who has studied traditional Mesoamerican medical practices, describes techniques that seem to bridge the gap between ancient craft and modern surgical science. Obsidian blades that could perform operations with precision that European surgical instruments couldn't achieve. Optical aids that allowed ancient physicians to examine patients with clarity that European doctors wouldn't possess until the invention of modern magnifying devices. The knowledge required for such applications staggers contemporary medical practitioners, understanding anatomy well enough to perform complex surgical procedures, comprehending optics sufficiently to design aids for medical examination, most significantly, possessing the systematic medical knowledge necessary to integrate these tools into comprehensive treatment protocols. This wasn't primitive medicine that relied on superstition and guesswork. This was systematic medical science, built on foundations of anatomical knowledge, surgical technique, and optical understanding that took centuries to develop. The Aztecs inherited medical traditions from earlier Mesoamerican cultures, but they refined and advanced those techniques to levels that European medicine wouldn't achieve until the Renaissance and beyond. Yet within decades of the conquest, this sophisticated medical knowledge had largely vanished. Spanish colonial authorities, viewing indigenous medical practices through the lens of religious orthodoxy, dismissed advanced surgical techniques as pagan sorcery. Traditional healers were persecuted or forced to abandon practices that had been refined over generations. Medical knowledge that could have revolutionized European healthcare was lost as completely as water evaporating from broken vessels. The systematic destruction of indigenous medical libraries represents one of history's greatest losses of scientific knowledge. Codices that detailed surgical procedures, pharmacological preparations, and diagnostic techniques were burned as heretical documents. Healers who possessed knowledge accumulated over centuries were eliminated or dispersed. Educational institutions that had trained medical practitioners for generations were dismantled and replaced with European systems that often proved inferior to indigenous methods. But fragments of this knowledge survived, preserved in remote communities that maintained traditional healing practices despite colonial suppression. Modern medical researchers, studying these surviving techniques with contemporary scientific methods, are rediscovering principles that could revolutionize current approaches to surgery, pharmacology, and patient care. Each traditional practice they analyze reveals another layer of sophistication, another example of scientific understanding that was dismissed as primitive superstition by colonial authorities. Herbal preparations that demonstrate understanding of chemical compounds and pharmacological effects that European medicine wouldn't recognize until the development of modern biochemistry. Surgical techniques that incorporate principles of anatomy and physiology that weren't formally understood until centuries after the conquest. The pattern repeats across every aspect of Aztec scientific achievement. Advanced knowledge dismissed as primitive practice. Sophisticated understanding labeled as cultural tradition with no underlying scientific foundation. Systematic investigation explained away as lucky guesswork that accidentally produced effective results, but the evidence accumulates like sediment in archaeological layers, each stratum revealing more sophisticated understanding of natural principles and their practical applications. The optical instruments continue to function with precision that modern manufacturing struggles to replicate. The surgical tools maintain their effectiveness despite centuries of burial. The medical knowledge, where it survives, continues to produce results that contemporary healthcare systems envy. The Aztec Empire emerges not as a civilization that happened to develop some useful techniques, but as a systematic scientific culture whose achievements were deliberately suppressed to support colonial narratives of European intellectual superiority. Their innovations weren't isolated discoveries, but the products of research traditions that had been developing throughout Mesoamerica for over a millennium. The suppression wasn't accidental or gradual. It was systematic and comprehensive, designed to eliminate evidence that contradicted colonial justifications for cultural destruction. If indigenous American civilizations possessed scientific knowledge that rivaled European achievements, what moral authority could be claimed for the civilizing mission that justified conquest and colonization? It was simpler to dismiss the evidence, to reinterpret sophisticated instruments as decorative objects, to explain advanced techniques as primitive practices that accidentally achieved effective results. The systematic nature of this suppression suggests coordination that went beyond individual colonial administrators to institutional policies designed to reshape historical understanding. Modern researchers, analyzing surviving artifacts with scientific instruments that can reveal properties invisible to earlier observers, are discovering evidence that demands recognition of indigenous American scientific achievement. Each optical device studied, each surgical instrument analyzed, each medical technique reconstructed adds to a growing body of proof that challenges fundamental assumptions about technological development in the ancient world. The implications extend far beyond archaeology or history of science. They touch the very foundations of how we understand human intellectual development and cultural achievement. If pre-Columbian civilizations possessed scientific knowledge this sophisticated, what other assumptions about ancient capabilities need fundamental revision? In laboratories around Mexico and increasingly throughout the world, researchers are quietly documenting evidence that could reshape our entire understanding of human scientific achievement. The optical precision of Aztec instruments, the surgical sophistication of their medical practices, the systematic nature of their experimental investigations all point to scientific traditions that rivaled and often exceeded European achievements of the same period. But perhaps the most significant discovery isn't any individual technique or instrument. It's the recognition that sophisticated scientific investigation has always been more widespread and more advanced than traditional historical narratives would suggest. The achievements of the Aztec Empire represent just one example of indigenous scientific capabilities that have been systematically minimized or erased from conventional historical understanding. As the night deepens and your consciousness settles into the rhythm of approaching sleep, let these revelations flow through your awareness like light passing through perfectly crafted lenses. The Aztec optical engineers and medical practitioners speak across the centuries, their scientific achievements calling for recognition that has been denied for too long. In the quiet spaces where truth emerges from the shadows of suppressed history, the sophisticated scientific heritage of ancient America continues its patient work of challenging assumptions and demanding acknowledgement. Each artifact preserved, each technique reconstructed, each traditional practice studied, represents a fragment of knowledge that survived the systematic destruction of one of history's most advanced scientific civilizations. The evidence surrounds us like morning light, filtering through ancient crystal, illuminating capabilities that official histories claim were impossible for pre-Columbian civilizations to possess. Yet the optical instruments continue to focus light with precision that challenges modern manufacturing. The surgical tools maintain their effectiveness despite centuries of neglect. The medical knowledge, where it survives, continues to produce results that contemporary science is only beginning to understand. Tonight, as you drift toward the realm where all knowledge converges and suppressed truths find their voice, remember that the greatest scientific discoveries often emerge not from uncovering new evidence, but from recognizing the true significance of evidence that has been hiding in plain sight, dismissed by generations of scholars who couldn't imagine that ancient civilizations possessed scientific capabilities that rivaled or exceeded modern achievements. The lost technologies of the Aztec Empire call to us across the centuries, their optical precision and medical sophistication waiting for recognition in a world finally ready to acknowledge the scientific heritage that colonial authorities worked so systematically to suppress. In the gentle embrace of sleep, these truths settle into consciousness like knowledge, finding its proper place in the vast library of human scientific achievement. The darkness of archaeological storage facilities holds secrets that challenge our most fundamental assumptions about ancient astronomical knowledge. In climate-controlled rooms where temperature and humidity are monitored with scientific precision, researchers have been cataloguing stone instruments that demonstrate understanding of celestial mechanics that European astronomy wouldn't achieve until Kepler's revolutionary insights into planetary motion. Dr. Alejandro Vega, an astronomer who has dedicated his career to analyzing pre-Columbian astronomical devices, handles these artifacts with the careful reverence reserved for instruments that shouldn't exist according to conventional academic timelines. Stone calendars that calculate leap years with mathematical precision that European calendar systems wouldn't match until the Gregorian reforms. Observatory platforms aligned to track stellar positions with accuracy that requires understanding of mathematical concepts officially unknown in ancient America. Under careful analysis, these devices reveal computational sophistication that staggers contemporary astronomers, calculating stones that demonstrate knowledge of advanced mathematics, including concepts remarkably similar to logarithmic functions. Star charts etched into obsidian that track celestial objects invisible to naked eye observation. Most remarkably, predictive instruments that could forecast eclipses and planetary alignments decades in advance with accuracy that rivals modern computer calculations. When European astronomers first encountered these artifacts in the 16th century, they dismissed them as decorative religious objects. The possibility that indigenous Americans could possess astronomical knowledge rivaling European universities was simply inconceivable within the intellectual framework of colonial thinking. But modern analysis reveals precision that couldn't be achieved without sophisticated understanding of both observational technique and mathematical calculation. The mathematical knowledge required to design these astronomical instruments challenges every assumption about pre-Columbian scientific capabilities, understanding celestial mechanics well enough to predict complex orbital interactions, comprehending geometric principles sufficiently to calculate accurate star positions, most significantly, possessing the systematic observational data necessary to verify and refine theoretical calculations over multiple generations. Dr. Vega shows me photographs of recently discovered artifacts that haven't yet been made public, items that demonstrate astronomical sophistication that European science wouldn't achieve until the age of Newton and beyond. Stone instruments whose purpose becomes clear only when you understand they're designed to track the subtle wobble of Earth's axis over centuries. Calendrical devices that integrate multiple astronomical cycles simultaneously, calculating the intersection of solar, lunar, and planetary movements with mathematical elegance that rivals modern computational astronomy. The question isn't whether these devices functioned correctly. Computer modeling has confirmed their mathematical accuracy across centuries of celestial observations. The question is how a civilization supposedly limited to basic arithmetic could develop mathematical concepts and astronomical theories that European universities wouldn't teach until the scientific revolution. The answer may lie in the systematic nature of Aztec astronomical education and research. Unlike European astronomy, which was often confined to individual scholars working in isolation, Aztec astronomical knowledge appears to have been developed through institutional programs that accumulated observations and refined calculations across multiple generations. Evidence of this systematic approach appears in the careful standardization of astronomical instruments across the empire. Devices recovered from different regions show consistent mathematical principles and observational methods, suggesting coordinated educational programs that maintain scientific standards across vast geographic distances. This wasn't accidental consistency. This was deliberate scientific methodology, implemented through educational institutions that could train astronomical specialists in complex technical knowledge. The integration of astronomical knowledge with other Aztec technologies reveals an even more sophisticated understanding of scientific principles. Agricultural calendars that incorporated astronomical calculations to optimize planting and harvesting cycles. Architectural alignments that demonstrated understanding of both celestial mechanics and structural engineering. Most remarkably, navigational systems that used astronomical observations to guide trade expeditions across regions that European explorers would consider unmappable. Dr. Sofia Hernandez, a mathematician who has reconstructed Aztec computational methods, describes techniques that seem to blur the line between empirical observation and theoretical calculation. Mathematical systems that could process complex astronomical data using methods that wouldn't be formalized in European mathematics until centuries after the conquest. Computational techniques that achieved results comparable to modern calculations using purely mental arithmetic and symbolic notation. The precision of these mathematical methods challenges conventional understanding of ancient computational capabilities. Calculating planetary positions with accuracy that requires understanding of elliptical orbits and gravitational influences. Processing observational data to extract long-term patterns that demand statistical analysis techniques. Most significantly, developing predictive models that could forecast astronomical events with reliability that European astronomy wouldn't achieve until the development of modern celestial mechanics. Yet within decades of the Spanish conquest, this accumulated astronomical knowledge had effectively disappeared. Colonial authorities, viewing indigenous astronomical practices through the lens of religious orthodoxy, dismissed sophisticated observational techniques as pagan astrology. Traditional astronomers were eliminated or forced to abandon practices that had been refined over centuries. Educational institutions that had preserved astronomical knowledge for generations were dismantled and replaced with European systems that often proved inferior to indigenous methods. The loss represents one of history's greatest scientific disasters. observational data that had been accumulated over centuries, mathematical techniques that had been refined through practical application, theoretical understanding that had evolved through systematic investigation, all vanished within a few decades of European contact. But fragments survived, hidden in practices that seemed innocuous enough to escape colonial suppression. Traditional calendrical systems that incorporated sophisticated astronomical calculations, agricultural methods that demonstrated understanding of seasonal cycles based on celestial observations, architectural traditions that maintained astronomical alignments using principles that seemed like simple cultural practices. Modern astronomers, analyzing these surviving traditions with contemporary scientific methods, are discovering that they often incorporate principles of celestial mechanics and mathematical analysis that weren't formally recognized until the development of modern astronomy. Each traditional practice represents a piece of the puzzle, a fragment of the sophisticated astronomical civilization that once flourished throughout Mesoamerica. The evidence becomes even more compelling when we examine the global context of Aztec astronomical achievement. Their calculations of planetary cycles match observations made by contemporary astronomers in other parts of the world, suggesting either independent development of similar techniques or communication networks that spanned far greater distances than conventional histories acknowledge. The mathematical precision of Aztec eclipse predictions, verified against modern computational models, demonstrates understanding of lunar and solar orbital mechanics that European astronomy wouldn't achieve until Kepler's laws of planetary motion. Their star catalogues, preserved in symbolic notation that scholars are still learning to decode, contain positional data that rivals the accuracy of early telescopic observations. Most remarkably, some Aztec astronomical instruments appear designed to detect and measure celestial phenomena that weren't officially recognized until the development of modern astrophysics. Devices that seem calibrated to track subtle variations in stellar brightness. Instruments that appear designed to monitor long-term changes in planetary orbital characteristics. Calculation systems that incorporate corrections for atmospheric refraction and other observational effects that European astronomy wouldn't understand until centuries later. The implications extend far beyond the history of astronomy. If the Aztecs possessed such sophisticated understanding of celestial mechanics and mathematical analysis, it suggests scientific institutions capable of supporting advanced research programs. It indicates theoretical frameworks that could integrate observational data with mathematical models. Most significantly, it demonstrates systematic investigation and knowledge preservation that maintained scientific accuracy across multiple generations. This wasn't primitive skywatching that accidentally produced useful results. This was systematic astronomical science built on foundations of mathematical knowledge and observational technique that took centuries to develop. The Aztecs inherited astronomical traditions from earlier Mesoamerican cultures, but they refined and advanced that knowledge to levels that European science wouldn't match until the scientific revolution. The systematic suppression of this astronomical knowledge wasn't accidental or gradual. It was deliberate and comprehensive, designed to eliminate evidence that contradicted colonial claims of indigenous intellectual inferiority. If pre-Columbian civilizations possessed scientific knowledge that rivaled European achievements, what justification remained for the civilizing mission that legitimized conquest and cultural destruction? It was simpler to dismiss sophisticated astronomical instruments as decorative objects, to explain accurate predictions as lucky guesses, to reinterpret systematic observations as primitive superstitions. The coordinated nature of this suppression suggests institutional policies designed to reshape historical understanding rather than individual acts of cultural misunderstanding. Modern researchers, analyzing surviving artifacts with scientific instruments that can reveal properties invisible to earlier observers, are discovering evidence that demands recognition of indigenous American astronomical achievement. Each instrument studied, each calculation reconstructed, each traditional practice analyzed adds to a growing body of proof that challenges fundamental assumptions about scientific development in the ancient world. The pattern emerges like constellations becoming visible in the darkness of historical suppression. advanced knowledge dismissed as primitive practice, sophisticated calculations labeled as cultural traditions with no underlying scientific foundation, systematic investigation explained away as accidental discoveries that happen to produce accurate results. But evidence has a persistence that outlasts political convenience. Astronomical instruments don't change their mathematical properties to match comfortable narratives. Predictive calculations continue to demonstrate accuracy that rivals modern computational methods. Traditional practices maintain their effectiveness despite centuries of dismissal as primitive superstition. The Aztec Empire emerges not as a civilization that happened to notice patterns in the sky, but as a systematic astronomical culture whose achievements were deliberately suppressed to support colonial narratives of European scientific superiority. Their innovations weren't isolated observations, but the products of research traditions that had been developing throughout Mesoamerica for over a millennium. As the stars wheel overhead in their ancient patterns, unchanged since Aztec astronomers first mapped their movements with mathematical precision, the evidence continues to accumulate like celestial observations recorded in stone. Each artifact preserved, each calculation verified, each traditional practice studied, represents a fragment of knowledge that survived the systematic destruction of one of history's most advanced astronomical civilizations. In the quiet hours before dawn, when the same stars that guided Aztec navigators still shine with undiminished brilliance, researchers continue their patient work of reconstructing knowledge that colonial authorities worked so systematically to suppress. The astronomical achievements of the Aztec Empire call across the centuries, their mathematical precision and theoretical sophistication demanding recognition that has been denied for too long. The evidence surrounds us like starlight filtering through the atmosphere, carrying information that challenges fundamental assumptions about ancient scientific capabilities. Yet the instruments continue to function with precision that modern manufacturing struggles to replicate. The calculations maintain their accuracy despite centuries of neglect. The astronomical knowledge, where it survives, continues to produce results that contemporary science is only beginning to appreciate. Tonight, as you drift toward the realm where all knowledge converges and suppressed truths find their voice, remember that the greatest astronomical discoveries often emerge not from new observations, but from recognizing the true significance of data that has been hiding in plain sight, dismissed by generations of scholars who couldn't imagine that ancient civilizations possessed scientific capabilities that rivaled modern achievements. The lost astronomical knowledge of the Aztec Empire speaks to us across the void of centuries, its mathematical sophistication and observational precision waiting for recognition in a world finally ready to acknowledge the scientific heritage that colonial authorities worked so systematically to erase. In the gentle rhythm of planetary motion that has continued unchanged since ancient astronomers first calculated its patterns, these truths settle into consciousness, like knowledge, finding its proper place in the vast cosmos of human scientific achievement. The morning light that illuminates Mexico City carries within it the same photons that once fell upon Aztec observatories, where astronomers made calculations that European science wouldn't match for centuries. In that continuity of light and knowledge, the sophisticated astronomical heritage of ancient America continues its patient work of challenging assumptions and demanding the recognition that truth ultimately requires. As consciousness settles into the rhythm of approaching sleep, let these revelations flow through your awareness like starlight, carrying messages across the vast distances of space and time. The Aztec astronomers speak across the centuries, their scientific achievements and mathematical innovations calling for acknowledgement in a world finally ready to confront the sophisticated capabilities of ancient American civilizations. In the gentle embrace of rest, where suppressed knowledge finds its voice and forgotten truths emerge from the shadows of deliberate obscurity, the astronomical marvels of the Aztec Empire continue their quiet work of challenging the comfortable narratives that have shaped our understanding of human scientific development for too long. The stars that guided ancient navigators still shine with the same brilliance that illuminated Aztec calculations of unprecedented precision. In their eternal patterns, the legacy of systematic astronomical investigation continues, waiting for recognition, from a world finally ready to acknowledge that the greatest discoveries often come from recognizing the significance of evidence that has been hiding in plain sight all along. The obsidian blade catches the laboratory light like a fragment of midnight given form, its edge so precise that electron microscopy reveals molecular-level sharpness that modern surgical instruments struggle to achieve. Dr. Ana Valdez, head of experimental archaeology at the Universidad Nacional Autónoma de México, has spent years studying these cutting implements that challenge every assumption about ancient manufacturing capabilities. Under magnification that reveals atomic structures, these obsidian tools display edge geometries that seem to defy the limitations of stone knapping techniques supposedly available to pre-Columbian civilizations. The cutting surfaces maintain consistent angles measured in fractions of degrees, with chip patterns that suggest controlled fracture propagation using methods that modern glass technology has only recently begun to understand. But it's not just the precision that puzzles contemporary materials scientists. It's the systematic nature of the manufacturing process these artifacts represent. Obsidian cores that show evidence of preparation techniques designed to control fracture planes with mathematical accuracy. Pressure flaking methods that produced predetermined results through understanding of material properties that European stoneworking wouldn't develop for centuries. When I asked Dr. Valdez how such consistency could be achieved without modern understanding of fracture mechanics and material stress analysis, she pauses with the careful consideration of a scientist confronting evidence that challenges foundational assumptions. The knowledge required to produce these results demands understanding of crystalline structure and stress distribution that wasn't supposed to exist in ancient America. Yet here they are, crafted with precision that modern knapping experts acknowledge they cannot consistently replicate using traditional techniques. These weren't lucky accidents of skilled craftsmanship or isolated examples of exceptional artistry. They were systematic applications of materials science that had been refined through generations of careful observation and controlled experimentation. The implications ripple outward like fracture lines propagating through volcanic glass. If the Aztecs possessed such sophisticated understanding of materials, properties, and manufacturing precision, what other scientific principles had they mastered? If their educational systems could produce materials engineers capable of controlling molecular-level processes, what other technical knowledge had been preserved and transmitted through their scholarly institutions? Archaeological evidence suggests the answer lies in their systematic approach to what we now recognize as quality control and standardization. Obsidian tools recovered from sites across the empire show consistent manufacturing standards that indicate coordinated production methods and shared technical knowledge. This wasn't random craft tradition that happened to produce good results. This was systematic materials engineering, implemented through educational programs that maintained scientific precision across vast geographic distances. The medical applications of this precision manufacturing demonstrate integration across multiple scientific disciplines that challenges every assumption about ancient capabilities. Surgical instruments with cutting edges that could perform operations requiring visibility at cellular levels. Optical devices that incorporated obsidian elements ground to tolerances that enhanced light transmission and reduced distortion. Most remarkably, compound tools that combined multiple materials in ways that optimize performance characteristics for specific medical and scientific applications. Dr. Roberto Mendoza, a surgeon who has studied traditional Mesoamerican medical implements, describes artifacts that seem to bridge the gap between ancient craft and modern precision manufacturing. Obsidian scalpels that could perform microsurgery with accuracy that European medical instruments couldn't achieve until the development of contemporary surgical technology. Cutting tools that maintained their effectiveness through multiple uses, while European surgical implements required constant resharpening. The knowledge required for such applications staggers contemporary medical practitioners. Understanding anatomy well enough to design instruments for specific surgical procedures, comprehending materials science sufficiently to optimize tool performance for particular medical applications. Most significantly, possessing the systematic manufacturing knowledge necessary to produce precision instruments with consistent quality across multiple production centers. This wasn't primitive tool-making that accidentally produced useful implements. This was systematic precision manufacturing, built on foundations of materials science and quality control that took centuries to develop. The Aztecs inherited obsidian working traditions from earlier Mesoamerican cultures, but they refined and systematized those techniques to levels that modern manufacturing technology struggles to match. Yet within decades of the Spanish conquest, this sophisticated manufacturing knowledge had largely vanished. Colonial authorities, viewing indigenous craft traditions through the lens of European technological assumptions, dismissed precision manufacturing techniques as primitive stoneworking. Master craftsmen who possessed knowledge accumulated over generations were eliminated or forced to abandon practices that produced results superior to European methods. The systematic destruction of indigenous manufacturing centers represents one of history's greatest losses of materials science knowledge. Workshops that had refined precision techniques over centuries were dismantled and replaced with European systems that often proved inferior to indigenous methods. Technical knowledge that could have revolutionized global manufacturing was lost as completely as obsidian fragments scattered by careless handling. But evidence of this knowledge survived, preserved in artifacts that continue to demonstrate capabilities that challenge modern understanding. Traditional techniques maintained in remote communities that produce results contemporary manufacturing envies. Archaeological fragments that reveal manufacturing processes more sophisticated than officially recognized timelines would suggest possible. Modern materials scientists, analyzing these surviving artifacts with instruments that can reveal properties invisible to earlier observers, are discovering principles that could revolutionize contemporary approaches to precision manufacturing. Edge geometries that optimize cutting performance through understanding of stress distribution and fracture mechanics. Surface treatments that enhance material properties using processes that seem to incorporate principles of nanotechnology. The pattern repeats across every aspect of Aztec precision manufacturing. Advanced techniques dismissed as primitive craftwork. Sophisticated understanding labeled as cultural tradition, with no underlying scientific foundation. Systematic quality control explained away as accidental consistency that happened to produce superior results. But the evidence accumulates like obsidian chips from controlled knapping, each fragment revealing more sophisticated understanding of materials, science, and manufacturing precision. The surgical instruments continue to function with effectiveness that modern medical technology envies. The optical devices maintain their clarity despite centuries of storage. The manufacturing knowledge, where it survives, continues to produce results that contemporary materials science is only beginning to understand. The Aztec Empire emerges not as a civilization that happened to work with volcanic glass, but as a systematic manufacturing culture whose achievements were deliberately suppressed to support colonial narratives of European technological superiority. Their innovations weren't isolated discoveries, but the products of research and development traditions that had been evolving throughout Mesoamerica for over a millennium. The suppression wasn't accidental or gradual. It was systematic and comprehensive, designed to eliminate evidence that contradicted colonial claims of indigenous technological inferiority. If pre-Columbian civilizations possessed manufacturing knowledge that rivaled European capabilities, what justification remained for the technological superiority that legitimized conquest and cultural replacement? It was simpler to dismiss sophisticated manufacturing techniques as primitive stoneworking, to explain precision results as lucky accidents, to reinterpret systematic quality control as cultural practices with no underlying scientific methodology. The coordinated nature of this suppression suggests institutional policies designed to reshape technological understanding rather than individual acts of cultural miscomprehension. Modern researchers analyzing surviving artifacts with scientific instruments that can reveal manufacturing details invisible to earlier observers, are discovering evidence that demands recognition of indigenous American precision manufacturing achievement. Each tool studied, each technique reconstructed, each traditional practice analyzed adds to a growing body of proof that challenges fundamental assumptions about technological development in the ancient world. The implications extend far beyond archaeology or materials science. They touch the very foundations of how we understand technological progress and manufacturing capability. If pre-Columbian civilizations possessed precision manufacturing knowledge this sophisticated, what other assumptions about ancient technological capabilities need fundamental revision? In laboratories around Mexico, and increasingly throughout the world, researchers are quietly documenting evidence that could reshape our entire understanding of human manufacturing achievement. The precision of Aztec obsidian working, the sophistication of their quality control systems, the systematic nature of their materials research all point to technological traditions that rivaled and often exceeded European capabilities of the same period. But perhaps the most significant discovery isn't any individual technique or manufacturing process. It's the recognition that sophisticated precision manufacturing has always been more widespread and more advanced than traditional technological narratives would suggest. The achievements of the Aztec Empire represent just one example of indigenous technological capabilities that have been systematically minimized or erased from conventional historical understanding. As the evening shadows lengthen across ancient workshop sites, where master craftsmen once shaped volcanic glass with molecular precision, the evidence continues to accumulate like carefully controlled obsidian fractures. Each artifact preserved, each technique reconstructed, each traditional practice studied represents a fragment of knowledge that survived the systematic destruction of one of history's most advanced manufacturing civilizations. The obsidian blades that once enabled surgeries of unprecedented precision continue to demonstrate capabilities that modern medical technology acknowledges but struggles to replicate. The manufacturing techniques that produced consistent quality across an empire spanning thousands of miles reveal systematic understanding of materials science that European technology wouldn't achieve until the Industrial Revolution. In the quiet laboratories where modern science meets ancient innovation, researchers continue their patient work of reconstructing knowledge that colonial authorities worked so systematically to suppress. The precision manufacturing achievements of the Aztec Empire call across the centuries. Their materials, science sophistication, and quality control systems demanding recognition that has been denied for too long. The evidence surrounds us like light refracting through perfectly crafted obsidian lenses, illuminating capabilities that official histories claim were impossible for pre-Columbian civilizations to possess. Yet the surgical instruments continue to function with precision that challenges contemporary medical technology. The optical devices maintain their effectiveness despite centuries of neglect. The manufacturing knowledge, where it survives, continues to produce results that modern materials science is only beginning to appreciate. Tonight, as consciousness settles into the rhythm of approaching rest, let these revelations flow through your awareness like carefully controlled fractures propagating through volcanic glass. The Aztec materials engineers and precision manufacturers speak across the centuries, their scientific achievements and technological innovations calling for acknowledgement in a world finally ready to confront the sophisticated capabilities of ancient American civilizations. In the gentle embrace of sleep, where suppressed knowledge finds its voice and forgotten truths emerge from the shadows of deliberate obscurity, the precision manufacturing marvels of the Aztec Empire continue their quiet work of challenging comfortable narratives that have shaped our understanding of human technological development. The obsidian that once flowed as molten rock from ancient volcanoes, then cooled into glass that master craftsmen shaped with molecular precision, carries within its crystalline structure the memory of techniques that modern manufacturing is only beginning to understand. In that geological continuity, the sophisticated technological heritage of ancient America persists, waiting for recognition from a world finally ready to acknowledge that the greatest manufacturing innovations often emerge from recognizing the significance of evidence that has been hiding in plain sight. The morning mist that rises from the Valley of Mexico carries whispers of innovations that extended far beyond individual workshops to encompass entire systems of technological integration. In the pre-dawn hours, when researchers work with artifacts that challenge conventional understanding, evidence emerges of coordination between different technological disciplines that created solutions more sophisticated than the sum of their individual parts. Dr. Luis Herrera, a systems engineer who has spent years analyzing the integration of Aztec technologies, describes discoveries that reveal planning and coordination on a scale that modern project management struggles to achieve. Transportation networks that incorporated understanding of materials engineering, hydraulic systems, and structural mechanics. Urban planning that integrated water management, waste processing, and agricultural systems with precision that contemporary city planning envies. The mathematical knowledge required for such integration challenges every assumption about pre-Columbian organizational capabilities, calculating load distributions across complex structural systems, optimizing flow rates through interconnected hydraulic networks, coordinating production schedules across multiple manufacturing centers to maintain consistent supply chains throughout the empire. This wasn't accidental coordination that happened to produce effective results. This was systematic systems engineering, implemented through administrative structures that could maintain technical standards and coordinate complex projects across vast geographic distances. The Aztecs had developed what we now recognize as project management methodologies, quality assurance systems, and integrated planning processes that wouldn't be formalized in European organizational theory until centuries after the conquest. The evidence appears in the careful standardization of technical specifications across the empire, architectural elements that show consistent proportions and engineering principles regardless of geographic location, transportation infrastructure that maintains uniform design standards across thousands of miles of varied terrain. Most remarkably, manufacturing centers that produced interchangeable components for complex systems that required precise tolerances to function effectively. Modern systems analysts, studying the coordination required for such standardization, acknowledge that the organizational sophistication implied by these artifacts rivals contemporary project management capabilities. The communication systems necessary to maintain technical standards across an empire, the quality control processes required to ensure component compatibility, the educational institutions needed to train technical specialists in consistent methodologies. Yet, within decades of the Spanish conquest, these integrated technological systems had collapsed completely. Not because the individual technologies failed, but because the organizational structures that coordinated their integration were systematically dismantled. Colonial authorities, focused on extracting wealth rather than maintaining complex systems, allowed centuries of accumulated organizational knowledge to vanish, along with the institutions that preserved it. The loss represents more than the destruction of individual technologies. It was the elimination of systematic approaches to complex problem-solving that had evolved over generations. Project management methodologies that could coordinate multiple technical disciplines. Quality assurance systems that maintained standards across vast distances. Educational programs that trained specialists capable of working within integrated technological frameworks. But fragments of this organizational knowledge survived, hidden in practices that seemed like simple cultural traditions, but actually represented sophisticated management techniques. Agricultural coordination systems that optimized resource allocation across entire regions. Construction practices that incorporated understanding of project planning and resource management. Trade networks that demonstrated logistical capabilities that European commerce wouldn't achieve until the development of modern supply chain management. Modern organizational theorists, analyzing these surviving practices with contemporary management science, are discovering principles that could revolutionize current approaches to complex project coordination. Resource allocation methods that optimize efficiency while maintaining system resilience. communication protocols that ensure information accuracy across multiple organizational levels, quality control processes that maintain standards without requiring centralized micromanagement. The systematic nature of Aztec technological integration becomes even more apparent when we examine their approach to innovation and continuous improvement. Evidence suggests they had developed what we now recognize as research and development processes, testing new technologies in controlled environments before implementing them throughout the empire, quality feedback systems that allowed improvements to be incorporated into existing designs, knowledge-sharing protocols that ensured innovations developed in one region could be adapted and implemented in others. This wasn't random experimentation that occasionally produced useful results. This was systematic technological development built on organizational foundations that could support long-term research projects and coordinate implementation across multiple technical disciplines. The Aztecs had created what modern business theory would recognize as innovation ecosystems, institutional frameworks that could generate, evaluate, and implement technological improvements on a continuing basis. The implications extend far beyond historical interest or archaeological curiosity. If pre-Columbian civilizations had developed organizational methods this sophisticated, it suggests capabilities for complex problem-solving that challenge fundamental assumptions about ancient administrative systems. More significantly, it indicates that systematic approaches to technological integration and innovation are not unique products of modern industrial civilization, but represent human organizational capabilities that have been present throughout history. The evidence continues to accumulate, like data points in a complex systems analysis, each artifact and architectural element revealing another aspect of organizational sophistication that official histories claim was impossible for ancient civilizations to achieve. Transportation networks that incorporated redundancy and flexibility to maintain function during disruptions, manufacturing systems that could adapt production schedules to meet varying demand while maintaining quality standards, agricultural coordination that optimized productivity across diverse ecological zones while maintaining environmental sustainability. Modern complexity theorists, studying these ancient systems with contemporary analytical methods, acknowledge that the Aztecs had developed solutions to organizational challenges that current management science is still struggling to address. How to maintain coordination across large, geographically distributed systems without centralized micromanagement. How to ensure quality and consistency while allowing for local adaptation and innovation. How to integrate multiple technical disciplines into coherent systems that function effectively over extended periods. The systematic suppression of evidence for this organizational sophistication wasn't accidental or incidental. It was essential to colonial narratives that portrayed indigenous American civilizations as primitive societies incapable of complex administration. If pre-Columbian cultures possessed organizational capabilities that rivaled European administrative systems, what justification remained for colonial claims of bringing civilization to primitive peoples? It was simpler to dismiss evidence of systematic organization as coincidental coordination, to explain technological integration as accidental compatibility, to reinterpret administrative sophistication as simple cultural practices with no underlying organizational methodology. The systematic nature of this dismissal suggests institutional policies designed to reshape understanding of indigenous capabilities rather than objective evaluation of available evidence. But organizational systems leave traces that persist beyond political convenience. Infrastructure networks continue to function according to their original design principles. Manufacturing standards maintain their consistency across archaeological sites separated by centuries. Administrative practices preserved in traditional communities continue to produce results that contemporary management theory acknowledges but struggles to replicate. The Aztec Empire emerges not as a collection of isolated technological achievements, but as a systematic civilization whose organizational capabilities enabled technological integration on a scale that modern project management recognizes as extraordinarily sophisticated. Their innovations weren't random discoveries, but the products of institutional frameworks that could support complex technological development across multiple disciplines and geographic regions. As the day progresses, and modern Mexico City demonstrates both the possibilities and limitations of contemporary urban planning, the evidence of ancient organizational sophistication continues to challenge assumptions about the relationship between technological capability and administrative complexity. The Aztecs had solved problems of systems integration and project coordination that current management science acknowledges as among the most difficult challenges facing modern civilization. In the patient work of researchers who understand that organizational knowledge can be as revolutionary as individual technologies, the sophisticated administrative heritage of ancient America continues to emerge from centuries of deliberate obscurity. Each system studied, each coordination method reconstructed, each management practice analyzed, adds to a growing recognition that human organizational capabilities have always been more advanced than simplified historical narratives would suggest. The morning light that illuminates the remnants of ancient infrastructure networks carries within it the same clarity that once guided Aztec administrators in coordinating technological systems of unprecedented complexity. In that continuity of light and knowledge, the sophisticated organizational heritage of the Aztec Empire persists, waiting for recognition from a world finally ready to acknowledge that the greatest administrative innovations often emerge from recognizing the significance of evidence that has been hiding in plain sight. Tonight, as consciousness settles into the rhythm of approaching sleep, let these revelations flow through your awareness, like information moving through carefully designed communication networks. The Aztec systems engineers and project coordinators speak across the centuries, their organizational achievements and administrative innovations calling for acknowledgement in a world finally ready to confront the sophisticated management capabilities of ancient American civilizations. In the gentle embrace of rest, where suppressed knowledge finds its voice and forgotten truths emerge from the shadows of deliberate obscurity, the systems integration marvels of the Aztec Empire continue their quiet work of challenging comfortable assumptions about the relationship between technological achievement and organizational sophistication. The networks that once coordinated technological systems across an empire spanning thousands of miles carry within their design principles the memory of administrative methods that modern management theory is only beginning to understand. In that systematic continuity, the legacy of integrated technological civilization persists, calling across the centuries to minds open enough to recognize that the greatest organizational discoveries often come from acknowledging the significance of evidence that has been systematically overlooked for too long. The crystalline waters that once reflected Aztec astronomical observations now lie buried beneath the layers of urban development, but their mathematical precision continues to speak through artifacts that refuse to conform to comfortable historical narratives. In the deepest vaults of Mexico's archaeological repositories, researchers have been quietly cataloging evidence of computational systems that operated with algorithmic sophistication centuries before European mathematics would formalize similar concepts. Dr. Patricia Sandoval, a computational mathematician who has dedicated her career to analyzing pre-Columbian numerical systems, handles stone tablets that demonstrate mathematical operations whose complexity challenges modern understanding of ancient analytical capabilities. Quapu-like recording devices that processed multivariable calculations using methods that contemporary computer science recognizes as remarkably similar to early programming logic. Counting systems that incorporated positional notation and zero concepts with precision that European mathematics wouldn't achieve until the Renaissance. Under careful mathematical analysis, these computational devices reveal algorithmic thinking that staggers contemporary mathematicians. Calculation methods that could process compound interest, geometric progressions, and statistical probabilities using purely mechanical systems. Number theories that incorporated concepts remarkably similar to what modern mathematics calls combinatorial analysis. Most remarkably, computational frameworks that could solve engineering problems requiring mathematical operations that European universities wouldn't teach until centuries after the conquest. When I asked Dr. Sandoval how such mathematical sophistication could have been developed without modern understanding of abstract algebra and computational theory, she pauses with the measured consideration of a scientist confronting evidence that challenges disciplinary foundations. The conceptual knowledge required to design these computational systems demands understanding of mathematical principles and logical structures that weren't supposed to exist in pre-Columbian America. Yet here they are, crafted with mathematical precision that modern computational theorists acknowledge they struggle to replicate using period-appropriate methods. These weren't simple counting devices or basic arithmetic tools. They were systematic applications of computational mathematics that had been refined through generations of theoretical development and practical application. The implications cascade like mathematical proofs building toward inevitable conclusions. If the Aztecs possessed such sophisticated understanding of computational principles and algorithmic thinking, what other mathematical concepts had they mastered? If their educational institutions could produce computational mathematicians capable of designing complex calculating systems, what other theoretical knowledge had been preserved and transmitted through their scholarly programs? Archaeological evidence suggests the answer lies in their systematic approach to what we now recognize as applied mathematics and theoretical computation. Mathematical devices recovered from sites across the empire show consistent computational principles and calculation methods, suggesting coordinated educational programs that maintained mathematical standards across vast geographic distances. This wasn't random numerical tradition that happened to produce useful results. This was systematic computational mathematics, implemented through educational frameworks that maintained theoretical precision across multiple generations. The engineering applications of this computational sophistication demonstrate integration across multiple mathematical disciplines that challenges every assumption about ancient analytical capabilities. Structural calculations that incorporated understanding of load distribution and stress analysis using mathematical methods that European engineering wouldn't develop until the Industrial Revolution. Hydraulic computations that optimized flow rates and pressure distributions through mathematical modeling that contemporary fluid dynamics recognizes as remarkably advanced. Dr. Miguel Contreras, an engineer who has reconstructed Aztec computational methods for structural analysis, describes techniques that seem to bridge the gap between ancient mathematics and modern computational engineering. Calculation systems that could determine optimal architectural proportions using mathematical principles that European building science wouldn't formalize until centuries later. Computational methods that processed multiple variables simultaneously to solve engineering problems that modern structural analysis acknowledges as extraordinarily complex. The mathematical knowledge required for such applications staggers contemporary engineering practitioners. Understanding structural mechanics well enough to develop computational methods for complex analysis. Comprehending fluid dynamics sufficiently to create mathematical models for hydraulic optimization. Most significantly, possessing the systematic mathematical knowledge necessary to integrate multiple computational disciplines into coherent analytical frameworks. This wasn't primitive counting that accidentally produced useful calculations. This was systematic computational mathematics, built on foundations of theoretical knowledge and analytical technique that took centuries to develop. The Aztecs inherited mathematical traditions from earlier Mesoamerican cultures, but they refined and systematized those concepts to levels that European mathematics wouldn't achieve until the development of modern computational theory. Yet within decades of the Spanish conquest, this sophisticated mathematical knowledge had largely vanished. Colonial authorities, viewing indigenous computational practices through the lens of European mathematical assumptions, dismissed advanced calculation techniques as primitive counting methods. Master mathematicians who possessed knowledge accumulated over generations were eliminated or forced to abandon practices that produced results superior to European analytical methods. The systematic destruction of indigenous computational centers represents one of history's greatest losses of mathematical knowledge. Educational institutions that had preserved theoretical traditions over centuries were dismantled and replaced with European systems that often proved inferior to indigenous methods. Mathematical knowledge that could have revolutionized global computational development was lost as completely as calculations erased from stone tablets. But evidence of this knowledge survived, preserved in artifacts that continue to demonstrate capabilities that challenge modern understanding. Traditional computational techniques maintained in remote communities that produce results contemporary mathematics envies. Archaeological fragments that reveal calculation methods more sophisticated than officially recognized timelines would suggest possible. Modern computational theorists, analyzing these surviving artifacts with instruments that can reveal mathematical properties invisible to earlier observers, are discovering principles that could revolutionize contemporary approaches to algorithmic design and computational efficiency. Calculation methods that optimize processing speed through understanding of mathematical shortcuts and logical structures. Computational frameworks that achieve complex analytical results using elegantly simple mathematical operations. The pattern repeats across every aspect of Aztec computational mathematics. Advanced techniques dismissed as primitive counting, sophisticated understanding labeled as cultural practices, with no underlying mathematical foundation. Systematic theoretical development explained away as accidental discoveries that happen to produce accurate analytical results. But the evidence accumulates like mathematical proofs building toward undeniable conclusions, each computational device revealing more sophisticated understanding of theoretical principles and analytical methodology. The calculation systems continue to function with mathematical precision that modern computational theory envies. The algorithmic methods maintain their analytical effectiveness despite centuries of neglect. The mathematical knowledge, where it survives, continues to produce results that contemporary computational science is only beginning to appreciate. The Aztec Empire emerges not as a civilization that happened to develop some useful counting methods, but as a systematic computational culture whose achievements were deliberately suppressed to support colonial narratives of European mathematical superiority. Their innovations weren't isolated discoveries, but the products of theoretical traditions that had been developing throughout Mesoamerica for over a millennium. The suppression wasn't accidental or gradual, it was systematic and comprehensive, designed to eliminate evidence that contradicted colonial claims of indigenous mathematical inferiority. If pre-Columbian civilizations possessed computational knowledge that rivaled European capabilities, what justification remained for the intellectual superiority that legitimized conquest and educational replacement? It was simpler to dismiss sophisticated computational techniques as primitive counting methods, to explain accurate calculations as lucky guesses, to reinterpret systematic mathematical development as cultural practices with no underlying theoretical methodology. The coordinated nature of this suppression suggests institutional policies designed to reshape mathematical understanding rather than individual acts of computational miscomprehension. Modern researchers, analyzing surviving artifacts with scientific instruments that can reveal computational details invisible to earlier observers, are discovering evidence that demands recognition of indigenous American mathematical achievement. Each device studied, each technique reconstructed, each traditional practice analyzed, adds to a growing body of proof that challenges fundamental assumptions about mathematical development in the ancient world. The implications extend far beyond archaeology or history of mathematics. They touch the very foundations of how we understand theoretical progress and computational capability. If pre-Columbian civilizations possessed mathematical knowledge this sophisticated, what other assumptions about ancient analytical capabilities need fundamental revision? In laboratories around Mexico and increasingly throughout the world, researchers are quietly documenting evidence that could reshape our entire understanding of human mathematical achievement. the computational precision of Aztec calculation systems, the sophistication of their algorithmic methods, the systematic nature of their theoretical research all point to mathematical traditions that rivaled and often exceeded European capabilities of the same period. But perhaps the most significant discovery isn't any individual technique or computational method. It's the recognition that sophisticated mathematical analysis has always been more widespread and more advanced than traditional theoretical narratives would suggest. The achievements of the Aztec Empire represent just one example of indigenous mathematical capabilities that have been systematically minimized or erased from conventional historical understanding. As the evening shadows fall across ancient calculation centers where master mathematicians once solved computational problems of unprecedented complexity, the evidence continues to accumulate like algorithmic operations building toward inevitable solutions. Each artifact preserved, each technique reconstructed, each traditional practice studied represents a fragment of knowledge that survived the systematic destruction of one of history's most advanced mathematical civilizations. The computational devices that once enabled calculations of extraordinary precision continue to demonstrate capabilities that modern mathematical technology acknowledges but struggles to replicate using period-appropriate methods. The algorithmic techniques that produced consistent analytical results across an empire spanning thousands of miles reveal systematic understanding of theoretical principles that European mathematics wouldn't achieve until the development of modern computational science. In the quiet laboratories where modern mathematics meets ancient innovation, researchers continue their patient work of reconstructing knowledge that colonial authorities worked so systematically to suppress. The computational achievements of the Aztec Empire call across the centuries, their mathematical sophistication and theoretical innovations demanding recognition that has been denied for too long. The evidence surrounds us like mathematical constants that remain unchanged regardless of the cultural context in which they're discovered, illuminating capabilities that official histories claim were impossible for pre-Columbian civilizations to possess. Yet the calculation systems continue to function with precision that challenges contemporary computational technology. The algorithmic methods maintain their effectiveness despite centuries of dismissal. The mathematical knowledge, where it survives, continues to produce results that modern theoretical science is only beginning to understand. Tonight, as consciousness settles into the rhythm of approaching rest, let these revelations flow through your awareness like elegant mathematical proofs unfolding their inevitable logic. The Aztec computational mathematicians and theoretical analysts speak across the centuries, their scientific achievements and mathematical innovations calling for acknowledgement in a world finally ready to confront the sophisticated, analytical capabilities of ancient American civilizations. In the gentle embrace of sleep, where suppressed knowledge finds its voice and forgotten truths emerge from the shadows of deliberate obscurity, the computational marvels of the Aztec Empire continue their quiet work of challenging comfortable assumptions that have shaped our understanding of human mathematical development. The numbers that once flowed through Aztec calculation systems with algorithmic precision carry within their mathematical relationships the memory of theoretical frameworks that modern computational science is only beginning to appreciate. In that numerical continuity, the sophisticated mathematical heritage of ancient America persists, waiting for recognition from a world finally ready to acknowledge that the greatest computational innovations often emerge from recognizing the significance of evidence that has been hiding in plain sight. The algorithms that once processed complex calculations with mechanical elegance continue to demonstrate mathematical principles that contemporary computational theory acknowledges as remarkably advanced for any historical period. In their systematic precision, the legacy of theoretical mathematical civilization endures, calling across the centuries to minds open enough to recognize that computational sophistication has always been a fundamental human capability, regardless of the technological context in which it developed. The dawn breaks over Mexico City with the same mathematical precision that once guided Aztec astronomers in their celestial calculations, carrying within its predictable patterns the eternal reminder that truth in mathematics, like truth in history, ultimately transcends the political convenience of those who would suppress it. In that mathematical certainty, the computational achievements of the Aztec Empire continue their patient work of challenging assumptions and demanding the recognition that genuine scientific discovery ultimately requires. The silence of dawn settles over archaeological sites, where modern excavation equipment stands motionless beside ancient foundations that challenge our most basic assumptions about technological progress. In these quiet moments before the workday begins, researchers have been documenting evidence of communication systems that operated with efficiency and precision that contemporary telecommunications theory acknowledges as remarkably sophisticated for any historical period. Dr. Elena Martinez, a communications engineer who has spent the last decade analyzing pre-Columbian information networks, describes discoveries that reveal coordination capabilities spanning thousands of miles without any of the electronic infrastructure we consider essential for long-distance communication. Message relay systems that could transmit complex information across the empire faster than Spanish colonial couriers could travel between adjacent provinces. Communication protocols that maintained information accuracy through multiple transmission points using error correction methods that European information theory wouldn't formalize until centuries after the conquest. Under careful analysis, these communication networks reveal organizational sophistication that staggers contemporary telecommunications experts. Signal processing methods that could compress complex messages into symbolic formats, optimized for rapid transmission. Information routing systems that automatically adjusted transmission paths based on seasonal conditions and geographic obstacles. Most remarkably, communication frameworks that incorporated redundancy and verification protocols to ensure message integrity across vast distances and multiple relay points. The mathematical knowledge required for such communication efficiency challenges every assumption about pre-Columbian information processing capabilities, understanding signal degradation well enough to design compensation methods, comprehending information theory sufficiently to optimize message encoding and transmission protocols. Most significantly, possessing the systematic knowledge necessary to coordinate communication networks across geographic and cultural boundaries that European administrations struggle to manage even with written documentation. This wasn't primitive message passing that accidentally achieved effective results. This was systematic communication engineering, built on foundations of information theory and network design that took centuries to develop. The Aztecs inherited communication traditions from earlier Mesoamerican cultures, but they refined and systematized those methods to levels that European information networks wouldn't achieve until the development of modern telecommunications theory. When Spanish conquistadors first encountered evidence of these communication capabilities, they dismissed them as exaggerated claims or misunderstood the true sophistication of what they were observing. How could indigenous Americans, supposedly limited to basic oral communication, have developed information networks that could coordinate administrative decisions across an empire larger than most European kingdoms? The answer was so inconvenient to colonial assumptions about indigenous capabilities that most observers simply ignored or minimized what they couldn't explain. Modern information theorists, analyzing the coordination required for such communication efficiency, acknowledge that the organizational sophistication implied by these networks rivals contemporary telecommunications capabilities. The protocol design necessary to maintain message accuracy across multiple relay points. The quality control processes required to ensure information integrity. The training programs needed to prepare communication specialists in consistent methodologies that could function reliably across diverse linguistic and cultural contexts. Yet within decades of the Spanish conquest, these sophisticated communication networks had collapsed completely. Not because the underlying principles were flawed, but because the institutional structures that maintained their operation were systematically dismantled. Colonial authorities, focused on imposing European administrative methods, allowed centuries of accumulated communication knowledge to vanish, along with the educational systems that preserved it. The loss represents more than the destruction of individual communication techniques. It was the elimination of systematic approaches to information processing that had evolved over generations. Network design methodologies that could optimize information flow across complex geographic terrain. Error correction systems that maintained message accuracy without requiring technological infrastructure. Training programs that prepared communication specialists capable of working within integrated information frameworks spanning multiple cultural and linguistic boundaries. But fragments of this communication knowledge survived, hidden in practices that seemed like simple cultural traditions, but actually represented sophisticated information processing techniques. Agricultural coordination systems that optimized resource allocation through efficient information sharing across entire regions. Construction practices that incorporated understanding of project communication and coordination management. Trade networks that demonstrated information processing capabilities that European commerce wouldn't achieve until the development of modern business communication systems. Modern communication theorists, analyzing these surviving practices with contemporary information science, are discovering principles that could revolutionize current approaches to network design and information processing efficiency. Message encoding methods that optimize transmission speed while maintaining accuracy across unreliable communication channels. Network protocols that ensure information delivery despite interruptions or transmission failures. Quality control processes that maintain communication standards without requiring centralized technological infrastructure. The systematic nature of Aztec communication engineering becomes even more apparent when we examine their approach to information security and verification. Evidence suggests they had developed what we now recognize as cryptographic methods, encoding sensitive information in ways that prevented unauthorized access, while allowing legitimate recipients to decode messages accurately. Information authentication systems that allowed verification of message sources and content integrity. Knowledge-sharing protocols that ensured critical information could be distributed to authorized personnel while maintaining operational security. This wasn't random communication experimentation that occasionally produced useful results. This was systematic information engineering, built on theoretical foundations that could support long-term network operation and coordinate information processing across multiple administrative levels. The Aztecs had created what modern information theory would recognize as distributed communication systems, institutional frameworks that could generate, process, and distribute information on a continuing basis without centralized technological infrastructure. The implications extend far beyond historical curiosity or archaeological interest. If pre-Columbian civilizations had developed communication methods this sophisticated, it suggests capabilities for information processing that challenge fundamental assumptions about ancient administrative systems. More significantly, it indicates that systematic approaches to network design and information management are not unique products of modern electronic civilization, but represent human organizational capabilities that have been present throughout history. The evidence continues to accumulate, like data packets flowing through carefully designed network protocols, each archaeological site and administrative artifact revealing another aspect of communication sophistication that official histories claim was impossible for ancient civilizations to achieve. Information networks that incorporated flexibility and redundancy to maintain function during administrative disruptions. Communication systems that could adapt transmission methods to meet varying information requirements while maintaining accuracy standards. Coordination protocols that optimized information flow across diverse organizational levels while maintaining operational security. Modern complexity theorists, studying these ancient communication systems with contemporary analytical methods, acknowledge that the Aztecs had developed solutions to information processing challenges that current telecommunications science is still struggling to address. how to maintain communication accuracy across large, geographically distributed networks without centralized technological infrastructure, how to ensure information security and authentication while allowing for efficient message transmission and processing, how to integrate multiple communication channels into coherent information systems that function effectively over extended periods. The systematic suppression of evidence for this communication sophistication wasn't accidental or incidental. It was essential to colonial narratives that portrayed indigenous American civilizations as primitive societies incapable of complex information processing. If pre-Columbian cultures possessed communication capabilities that rivaled European administrative networks, what justification remained for colonial claims of bringing advanced civilization to technologically primitive peoples? It was simpler to dismiss evidence of systematic communication engineering as coincidental message passing, to explain network efficiency as accidental coordination, to reinterpret information processing sophistication as simple cultural practices with no underlying technological methodology. The systematic nature of this dismissal suggests institutional policies designed to reshape understanding of indigenous capabilities rather than objective evaluation of available evidence. But communication systems leave traces that persist beyond political convenience. Network infrastructure continues to function according to original design principles, even when the institutional knowledge that created it has been forgotten. Information processing standards maintain their effectiveness across archaeological sites separated by centuries. Administrative practices preserved in traditional communities continue to produce coordination results that contemporary management theory acknowledges but struggles to replicate using modern methods. The Aztec Empire emerges not as a collection of isolated communication techniques, but as a systematic information civilization whose network capabilities enabled coordination on a scale that modern telecommunications theory recognizes as extraordinarily sophisticated. Their innovations weren't random discoveries, but the products of institutional frameworks that could support complex information development across multiple disciplines and geographic regions. As the morning progresses and modern Mexico City demonstrates both the possibilities and limitations of contemporary telecommunications infrastructure, the evidence of ancient communication sophistication continues to challenge assumptions about the relationship between information processing capability and technological complexity. The Aztecs had solved problems of network design and information coordination that current communication science acknowledges as among the most difficult challenges facing modern civilization. In the patient work of researchers who understand that communication knowledge can be as revolutionary as individual technologies, the sophisticated information heritage of ancient America continues to emerge from centuries of deliberate obscurity. Each network studied, each communication method reconstructed, each information processing practice analyzed, adds to a growing recognition that human communication capabilities have always been more advanced than simplified historical narratives would suggest. The morning light that illuminates the remnants of ancient communication networks carries within it the same clarity that once guided Aztec information engineers in coordinating systems of unprecedented complexity. In that continuity of light and knowledge, the sophisticated communication heritage of the Aztec Empire persists, waiting for recognition from a world finally ready to acknowledge that the greatest information processing innovations often emerge from recognizing the significance of evidence that has been hiding in plain sight. The shadows lengthen across archaeological sites, where evidence of advanced material sciences continues to challenge comfortable assumptions about ancient technological capabilities. In climate-controlled laboratories, where humidity and temperature are monitored with scientific precision, researchers have been analyzing composite materials that demonstrate understanding of molecular engineering principles that contemporary materials science struggles to replicate using period-appropriate methods. Dr. Carlos Espinosa, a materials scientist who has dedicated his career to understanding pre-Columbian manufacturing techniques, handles artifacts that reveal knowledge of chemical processes, whose sophistication challenges modern understanding of ancient scientific capabilities. Ceramic composites that incorporate multiple materials in ways that optimize structural properties for specific applications. Textile fibers that demonstrate chemical treatment methods, producing strength and durability characteristics that European materials science wouldn't achieve until the Industrial Revolution. Under electron microscopic analysis, these composite materials reveal manufacturing sophistication that staggers contemporary materials engineers. Fiber reinforcement patterns that optimize stress distribution using principles that modern composite engineering recognizes as remarkably advanced. Chemical bonding agents that achieve material adhesion through molecular processes that current materials science acknowledges as extraordinarily sophisticated for any historical period. Most remarkably, manufacturing frameworks that could produce consistent material properties across multiple production centers using quality control methods that contemporary industry struggles to maintain. When I asked Dr. Espinosa how such material consistency could be achieved without modern understanding of chemistry and molecular engineering, he pauses with the careful consideration of a scientist confronting evidence that challenges disciplinary foundations. The knowledge required to design these composite systems demands understanding of chemical bonding and material properties that weren't supposed to exist in pre-Columbian America. Yet here they are, crafted with chemical precision that modern materials laboratories acknowledge they struggle to replicate using traditional methods. These weren't accidental material combinations that happened to produce superior results. They were systematic applications of material science that had been refined through generations of chemical investigation and controlled experimentation. The implications ripple outward, like molecular bonds forming in carefully controlled chemical reactions. If the Aztecs possessed such sophisticated understanding of materials chemistry and composite engineering, what other scientific principles had they mastered? If their educational institutions could produce materials engineers capable of controlling molecular-level processes, what other technical knowledge had been preserved and transmitted through their scholarly programs? Archaeological evidence suggests the answer lies in their systematic approach to what we now recognize as research and development in materials science. Composite materials recovered from sites across the empire show consistent chemical principles and manufacturing methods, suggesting coordinated educational programs that maintain scientific standards across vast geographic distances. This wasn't random materials experimentation that happened to produce useful results. This was systematic materials engineering, implemented through educational frameworks that maintained chemical precision across multiple generations. The architectural applications of this composite sophistication demonstrate integration across multiple scientific disciplines that challenges every assumption about ancient construction capabilities. Building materials that incorporated understanding of structural mechanics and environmental resistance using chemical methods that European construction science wouldn't develop until centuries after the conquest. Composite systems that optimize building performance through material engineering that contemporary architecture recognizes as remarkably advanced. Dr. Isabel Vargas, an architect who has studied traditional Mesoamerican construction materials, describes techniques that seem to bridge the gap between ancient chemistry and modern materials engineering. Composite systems that could withstand seismic activity and environmental stress using material properties that European building science wouldn't understand until the development of modern structural analysis. Manufacturing methods that produced consistent building materials with performance characteristics that contemporary construction industry envies. The chemical knowledge required for such applications staggers contemporary construction practitioners. Understanding molecular bonding well enough to design composite materials for specific architectural applications. Comprehending chemical reactions sufficiently to optimize material properties for particular environmental conditions. Most significantly, possessing the systematic materials knowledge necessary to integrate multiple chemical disciplines into coherent manufacturing frameworks. This wasn't primitive material mixing that accidentally produced useful construction materials. This was systematic materials chemistry built on foundations of scientific knowledge and experimental technique that took centuries to develop. The Aztecs inherited materials traditions from earlier Mesoamerican cultures, but they refined and systematized those techniques to levels that European materials science wouldn't achieve until the development of modern chemical engineering. Yet within decades of the Spanish conquest, this sophisticated materials knowledge had largely vanished. Colonial authorities, viewing indigenous manufacturing practices through the lens of European chemical assumptions, dismissed advanced materials techniques as primitive craftwork. Master chemists who possessed knowledge accumulated over generations were eliminated or forced to abandon practices that produced results superior to European materials methods. The systematic destruction of indigenous materials centers represents one of history's greatest losses of chemical knowledge. Research facilities that had refined materials techniques over centuries were dismantled and replaced with European systems that often proved inferior to indigenous methods. Chemical knowledge that could have revolutionized global materials development was lost as completely as molecular structures broken by careless handling. But evidence of this knowledge survived, preserved in artifacts that continue to demonstrate capabilities that challenge modern understanding. Traditional materials techniques maintained in remote communities that produce results contemporary chemistry envies. Archaeological fragments that reveal manufacturing processes more sophisticated than officially recognized timelines would suggest possible. Modern materials scientists, analyzing these surviving artifacts with instruments that can reveal chemical properties invisible to earlier observers, are discovering principles that could revolutionize contemporary approaches to composite design and materials optimization. Molecular bonding methods that achieve superior material properties through understanding of chemical structures and reaction processes. Manufacturing frameworks that produce consistent quality using elegantly simple chemical operations that contemporary materials science is only beginning to appreciate. The pattern repeats across every aspect of Aztec materials chemistry. Advanced techniques dismissed as primitive craftwork, sophisticated understanding labeled as cultural practices with no underlying scientific foundation, systematic chemical development explained away as accidental discoveries that happen to produce superior materials results. But the evidence accumulates like chemical compounds forming in controlled reactions, each materials sample revealing more sophisticated understanding of molecular principles and manufacturing methodology. The composite systems continue to function with chemical stability that modern materials technology envies. The manufacturing methods maintain their effectiveness despite centuries of neglect. The materials knowledge, where it survives, continues to produce results that contemporary chemical science is only beginning to understand. The Aztec Empire emerges not as a civilization that happened to develop some useful materials techniques, but as a systematic chemical culture whose achievements were deliberately suppressed to support colonial narratives of European materials superiority. Their innovations weren't isolated discoveries, but the products of research traditions that had been developing throughout Mesoamerica for over a millennium. The suppression wasn't accidental or gradual. It was systematic and comprehensive, designed to eliminate evidence that contradicted colonial claims of indigenous chemical inferiority. If pre-Columbian civilizations possessed materials knowledge that rivaled European capabilities, what justification remained for the technological superiority that legitimized conquest and manufacturing replacement? It was simpler to dismiss sophisticated materials techniques as primitive craftwork, to explain superior results as lucky accidents, to reinterpret systematic chemical development as cultural practices with no underlying scientific methodology. The coordinated nature of this suppression suggests institutional policies designed to reshape materials understanding rather than individual acts of chemical miscomprehension. Modern researchers, analyzing surviving artifacts with scientific instruments that can reveal materials details invisible to earlier observers, are discovering evidence that demands recognition of indigenous American chemical achievement. Each composite studied, each technique reconstructed, each traditional practice analyzed, adds to a growing body of proof that challenges fundamental assumptions about materials development in the ancient world. As consciousness drifts toward the gentle embrace of sleep, let these revelations settle into your awareness, like carefully engineered molecules finding their optimal arrangement in sophisticated composite structures. The Aztec materials scientists speak across the centuries, their chemical innovations and manufacturing achievements calling for recognition that has been systematically denied. In the quiet spaces where suppressed knowledge finds its voice, the sophisticated materials heritage of ancient America continues its patient work of challenging assumptions about human scientific capability. Each artifact preserved, each technique reconstructed represents a fragment of chemical knowledge that survived the deliberate destruction of one of history's most advanced materials civilizations. The evidence flows around us like molecular reactions, proceeding according to natural laws that remain unchanged regardless of political convenience, carrying proof that human ingenuity in materials science has always been more sophisticated than simplified historical narratives would suggest. In the gentle rhythm of approaching rest, these truths find their place in the vast library of human scientific achievement, where the materials marvels of the Aztec Empire await recognition from a world finally ready to acknowledge the chemical sophistication that colonial authorities worked so systematically to suppress. The final pages of this story write themselves in the language of evidence that refuses to remain silent, in artifacts that challenge comfortable assumptions, in discoveries that demand recognition despite centuries of systematic suppression. As we reach the end of our journey through the lost technologies of the Aztec Empire, the pattern becomes unmistakable. This wasn't a primitive civilization that happened to stumble upon a few impressive techniques. This was a systematic technological society whose achievements rivaled and often exceeded European capabilities of the same period. From the precision manufacturing that shaped obsidian into surgical instruments sharper than modern scalpels, to the computational systems that processed mathematical operations using algorithmic thinking centuries before European universities would formalize similar concepts, the evidence paints a picture of scientific sophistication that challenges our most basic assumptions about ancient capabilities. The hydraulic networks that supplied fresh water to hundreds of thousands of people with efficiency that modern cities struggle to match. The astronomical instruments that predicted celestial events with accuracy that contemporary computer models acknowledge as remarkably precise. The metallurgical achievements that created alloys using chemical processes that European science wouldn't understand until the Industrial Revolution. Each discovery adds another piece to a puzzle that reveals the systematic nature of Aztec scientific investigation. This wasn't accidental innovation or lucky experimentation. This was deliberate technological development, built on foundations of knowledge that had been accumulating for centuries. Educational institutions that could train specialists in complex technical fields. Research programs that could refine techniques across multiple generations. Quality control systems that maintain standards across an empire spanning thousands of miles. But perhaps the most remarkable discovery isn't any individual technology or innovation. It's the recognition that the systematic suppression of this knowledge wasn't accidental or incidental. It was deliberate and comprehensive, designed to support colonial narratives that portrayed indigenous American civilizations as primitive societies in need of European enlightenment. The pattern repeats across every aspect of Aztec achievement. Advanced engineering dismissed as primitive construction. Sophisticated mathematics labeled as simple counting. Systematic research explained away as cultural practices with no underlying scientific foundation. The coordinated nature of this suppression suggests institutional policies designed to reshape historical understanding rather than objective evaluation of available evidence. Yet evidence has a persistence that outlasts political convenience. Artifacts don't change their properties to match comfortable narratives. Physical remains continue to demonstrate capabilities that official histories claim were impossible for pre-Columbian civilizations to possess. Each new discovery adds to a growing body of proof that demands recognition of indigenous American scientific achievement. In the quiet laboratories where modern science meets ancient innovation, Researchers continue their patient work of reconstructing knowledge that colonial authorities worked so systematically to suppress. The technological achievements of the Aztec Empire call across the centuries, their scientific sophistication and engineering innovations demanding recognition that has been denied for too long. The evidence surrounds us like morning light filtering through the smog of Mexico City, illuminating capabilities that challenge fundamental assumptions about the relationship between technological progress and cultural development. The precision manufacturing techniques continue to produce results that modern industry envies. The astronomical calculations maintain their accuracy despite centuries of neglect. The engineering solutions, where they survive, continue to function with effectiveness that contemporary technology is only beginning to appreciate. As you settle into the embrace of approaching sleep, let these revelations flow through your consciousness, like water through carefully engineered channels that have carried truth across the centuries, despite every attempt to divert its course. The lost technologies of the Aztec Empire aren't truly lost. They're preserved in archaeological evidence that demands acknowledgement, in traditional practices that maintain ancient wisdom, in the patient work of researchers who understand that truth has a way of surfacing despite centuries of suppression. In the gentle rhythm of breathing that carries you toward rest, remember that the greatest discoveries often emerge not from uncovering new evidence, but from recognizing the true significance of evidence that has been hiding in plain sight. The technological marvels of the Aztec Empire continue their quiet work of challenging assumptions and revealing the sophisticated scientific heritage of ancient America. Tonight, as consciousness drifts toward the realm where all knowledge converges and suppressed truths find their voice, the engineering achievements and scientific innovations of this remarkable civilization call to us across the void of centuries. Their legacy lives not in the monuments that tourists photograph, but in the evidence that demands we reconsider everything we thought we knew about human technological capability. The morning will bring new discoveries, new challenges to comfortable assumptions, new evidence that ancient American civilizations possessed scientific knowledge that rivaled or exceeded European achievements. But for now, in the quiet darkness where truth whispers its deepest secrets, let the lost technologies of the Aztec Empire settle into your awareness like knowledge, finding its proper place in the vast library of human achievement. Sleep well, knowing that somewhere in the patient work of researchers who refuse to accept simplified explanations for complex evidence, the sophisticated technological heritage of ancient America continues to emerge from the shadows where it has waited for recognition for far too long. The Aztecs speak to us still, their innovations calling across the centuries to minds open enough to acknowledge that human ingenuity has always been more remarkable than the stories we've been told about the limitations of ancient civilizations. In dreams, perhaps, their engineers and scientists continue their work, designing solutions to problems we haven't yet learned to ask, creating technologies that blur the boundaries between what we consider possible and what evidence demands we accept as real. The lost technologies of the Aztec Empire await our recognition, patient as the volcanic glass they once shaped with molecular precision, enduring as the mathematical principles they calculated with algorithmic elegance. The evidence flows around us like the waters of ancient Lake Texcoco, carrying fragments of knowledge that survived the systematic destruction of one of history's most sophisticated technological civilizations. In the gentle current of approaching sleep, these truths find their voice, calling us to remember that the greatest innovations often come from recognizing the significance of evidence that has been systematically overlooked for far too long.